Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Olivia Barton. I'm 31 years old. This happened in late September of last year, 2024, when I decided to take a trip out to the Little Missouri National Grassland in North Dakota. I wasn't looking for trouble or excitement or anything beyond a desperately needed escape from my crumbling life. But what I found out there, sometimes I wish I could forget every second of it. Yet I can't let it go. I can't ignore the gnawing need to piece together the nightmare and hope that in doing so, I'll somehow free myself from it. At that time, I was a freelance illustrator, scraping together enough work to pay rent in a tiny studio apartment in Fargo. My personal life was in shambles. I'd left an emotionally toxic relationship that made me question everything I thought I knew about love. My father and I had fought over money I never asked him for. My mother refused to speak to me after taking his side. I felt so drained, like a hollow shell. I needed space to breathe, to rediscover who I was without all the noise. So I packed my gear, loaded my 6-year-old golden retriever Max into my old SUV, and drove west, eager to find some remote corner of the grassland to camp out for a few days. The drive was supposed to take about 5 hours. I didn't even mind the monotony of the highway. My phone's GPS told me to exit onto a dusty side road, a crooked path that wound through farmland and old, abandoned ranches. I had a paper map I'd printed too, just in case. I may be an introvert, but I'm cautious. I like to keep track of where I'm going. However, as I kept following these roads deeper into the land, I started noticing weird glitches on my phone. The GPS location would jump, showing me in random places. I laughed it off at first, thinking cell service was lousy out here. I had no idea how wrong it would get later. Eventually, the phone died outright. The battery was at 65% an hour ago, but now it was a black screen, unresponsive. Even my backup battery charger refused to work. It was brand new, so that was bizarre. Frustrated, but still feeling adventurous, I turned to my map. According to it, I should have been on a fairly recognizable county road, but the pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to something I'd barely call a trail. Grass and weeds scraped the underside of my SUV as I slowly crawled forward. I could see the tall grasses swaying in the distance. The late afternoon sun was strong, throwing long shadows across the earth. I found a clearing near what looked like the ruins of an old homestead. A few standing timbers, a sagging roof covered in moss, and broken windows told me that nobody had lived there for decades, maybe longer. There was a battered fence, half collapsed, circling the property. Something about that spot felt remote enough to satisfy my craving for solitude. I parked the SUV near a few scraggly trees and got out. Max bounded around, sniffing eagerly. At least he was happy. I was a ball of anxious adrenaline. The first thing I noticed was the heavy silence. No wind, no birdsong, no insect buzz. Just the hush of a place that time forgot. Still, I set up my small tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, and started a campfire in a stone ring I made, using rocks from around the property. Max was strangely quiet. He'd usually bark at anything new, but here he'd just stuck close to me, sniffing the air and letting out little whines now and then. As twilight came, I walked closer to the homestead remains. The front door had rotted away, leaving the frame open like a mouth with broken teeth. Dust motes danced in the dying light. Inside, it smelled of decaying wood and damp earth. I took a few steps in, and that's when I saw it. a porcelain doll lying on the floor. It was about a foot tall, with a hand-painted face. The cloth dress was ragged, stained by time and neglect. The eyes were glass, but for a moment I could have sworn they were wet, like they were real. It was probably just a reflection from the orange light of the setting sun. I felt an immediate spike of unease. I'm not superstitious, but something about that doll was intensely disturbing. My rational mind said, it's just a creepy toy left behind. My instincts, though, told me to leave it alone. So I did. I backed out of that wreck of a house and returned to my fire. Night came fast. The phone was still dead. And though that annoyed me, I told myself it was better this way. No distractions. I had a paper map for the route back. I'd manage. I fed Max, then heated some canned soup over the flames. The fire was bright, but occasionally it threw off flashes of blue or green sparks, which was odd. Different minerals or something in the wood, I guessed. It was my first sign that things weren't quite normal, but I shrugged it off. I crawled into my sleeping bag, Max settling in at my feet. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up. The fire had died down to embers. The night was unbelievably dark. The sky was overcast, so no moon or stars. Max was growling softly, which set my nerves on edge. I listened, nothing but hush. Then I heard a rustling near the homestead. A branch snapping. My heart raced as I scrambled out of the tent. I shone my flashlight around. Nothing. No footprints in the dew. Just an eerie sense of being watched. I told myself it was probably an animal. I coaxed Max back into the tent and tried to sleep again. I drifted off, only to dream of that porcelain doll, its eyes focusing on me when I wasn't looking. The next morning, I crawled out of my sleeping bag feeling stiff and uneasy. Max whined at me again, pressing his nose into my hand. Dogs always know when something's off. I unzipped the tent flap and froze. The doll was lying right there, positioned at the entrance of the tent, its face angled so it stared straight in. My heart lurched into my throat. "That's not possible," I muttered. I knew exactly where I'd seen it the night before, inside that crumbling house. Now it was here. Maybe a raccoon or something had dragged it out, but that made no sense. Why bring it right to my tent? I steeled my nerves, reached out, and picked it up by the frayed cloth around its torso. It felt heavier than I expected, like the porcelain was a thick ceramic. The face was chipped, a chunk missing from the cheek. The dress was ragged, as though it had been chewed by animals. Then I noticed the eyes again. They seemed too bright, too damp. Max barked at it, a short, sharp warning. I threw the doll aside, deep into a patch of wild grass. I didn't want that thing near me. I wanted to focus on my coffee and breakfast, on my day of hiking or sketching, yet my appetite was gone. Still, I forced down some granola and shared a bit with Max. Then I boiled water from a jug I'd brought for coffee. As I sipped, I noticed my phone, which I'd plugged into the dead backup battery, was still black. No charging indicator, no response. Great. I decided to see if I could fix my weird sense of unease by exploring. Maybe I could gather some wildflowers or do some quick sketches. I needed normalcy. I took Max and started walking a perimeter around the homestead. About 20 minutes in, I found an old livestock pen and, behind it, what might have once been a root cellar. The door was locked or stuck. I tried not to think too much about what might be inside. The entire property gave off a sinister vibe, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Close to noon, I returned to camp and discovered my container of food had started to smell. I'd brought sealed packages of ham and cheese and vacuum-packed beef jerky. They should have lasted. But now the ham was green, the cheese was fuzzy, and the jerky looked weirdly discolored. I cursed, tossing them out. Was the cooler broken? The ice was half melted, but it hadn't been that long. I had other supplies, ramen, some canned goods, crackers, but losing the fresh stuff was irritating. Fine, I can still manage for a few days, I thought. I'd tough it out. That night, I built another fire. This time, it kept sputtering like it was fighting me. I had plenty of dry kindling, but whenever I managed to get the flames going, they'd hiss and pop, the flames flickering blue or green before nearly dying. Max barked at them, as if the flames themselves were alive. Eventually, I got enough warmth to heat a can of soup. The entire time I had that prickly feeling of eyes on my back. The old homestead loomed in the darkness, and I swear I heard a scraping sound from inside, my imagination, probably. But every time the wind blew, I felt a chill cross my shoulders. That night, I slept fitfully. Over and over, I woke to the sensation of something brushing against the outside of my tent. I'd grab my flashlight, brandish it around, see nothing. At some point, exhausted, I drifted into a deeper sleep. When I finally pried my eyes open the next morning, the sky was a grayish-white, like it was about to rain. I felt around for Max. Empty. The dog wasn't in the tent with me, which was strange. Max usually stayed cuddled up. I unzipped the tent in a hurry and scrambled out, calling his name. That's when I noticed something else. My sleeping bag had been unzipped from the inside all the way down, as if someone had stood over me and quietly eased it open. I felt a shudder roll through my entire body. My scalp prickled with panic. Had Max done that somehow? No, a dog can't unzip a bag so neatly. Had I done it in my sleep? Possibly, but it was so precise I didn't remember doing it. I yelled for Max again, my voice echoing across the deserted grassland. Finally, I saw him trot out from behind the homestead. Relief flooded me, but he was acting off. He didn't bark or bound toward me as he usually did. Instead, he just walked slowly, tail low, almost catatonic. When he reached me, he pressed his nose to my leg, but didn't look me in the eye. "Max?" I knelt down, tried to ruffle his ears. He leaned into me, but didn't respond with his usual joy. There was a strange smell on him, too, like a stale, musty odor. Something from inside that rotting building? I decided that was it. I'd had enough. I'd go back to my SUV, drive to a more official campsite, maybe near a ranger station. But first, I wanted to see what Max had been doing in that homestead. Was he trapped there? Did something chase him? I told myself it was rational to check it out. A part of me dreaded discovering he'd been rummaging through old bones or something. I kept telling myself the doll was inconsequential, that it was just a leftover toy, but fear simmered under my skin. I walked to the homestead's entrance with Max beside me. The interior was darker than I remembered, the walls caving in, the floor rotten. The doll was nowhere to be seen, but I found footprints. They looked small, like those of a child in the dust. Impossible, right? Could it be a trick of the way the floorboards were broken? They led deeper into a side room. Max whimpered as soon as I stepped in there. He refused to follow. I took a few steps, the planks creaking, threatening to give. My flashlight beam swept across a pile of debris in the corner. Something cloth-wrapped. I picked through it, gagging at the musty smell. And there it was. The porcelain doll again, draped in moldy cloth. Its face was turned away, but as I nudged it with a stick, it seemed to roll over on its own, until it looked right at me. I flinched, dropping the stick. My heart hammered. As I backed away, I saw something else on the floor. My flashlight caught a reflection. I crouched, carefully picking it up. It was a tooth, small, white, maybe a child's tooth. Horror prickled up my spine. I didn't know if it was from an animal or a person, but it looked human. Bile rose in my throat. I fled the homestead. When we got back to the campsite, it was mid-afternoon. A sense of panic rattled my thoughts. I needed to leave. But then I saw my SUV's tires. They were slashed, 2 of them. Big gouges that had flattened them completely. Some malicious vandal, or maybe some bizarre accident. I was stuck. God damn it, no, I muttered, desperation surging. No phone service, no functioning backup battery, no working car. I can patch them, I told myself. I had a tire patch kit in the trunk, but those slashes looked too large. I might not have enough to fix it. I rummaged through my trunk anyway, frantic. I found the kit, but it was realistically only enough for a small puncture. Not these wide rips. I wanted to scream. That evening, I tried to build a fire again. It refused to stay lit, flickering with eerie colors that only deepened my paranoia. I was forced to rely on a small camp lantern for light. The sky was an unrelenting overcast, blotting out stars and moon. I heated some ramen with a small propane burner, but the taste was rancid. Checking, I realized the ramen's packaging had bloated, as if contaminated by moisture. How was that even possible? Defeated, I switched off the lantern and huddled in my tent, pressing Max close. He barely responded, just staring at me with wide, wet eyes. My heart pounded with a claustrophobic dread. I told myself, tomorrow morning, I'll walk until I find help. The nearest ranger station had to be miles away, but I had no choice. I drifted into a tumultuous sleep, plagued by nightmares of small footprints in the dirt, a giggle echoing from all sides, and the doll's eyes glistening in darkness. I woke up twice to what I thought was a human voice outside the tent, whispering my name. The second time, I shot out of my bag, grabbed my flashlight and yanked the tent zipper down. Nothing. I whipped the beam around. But I saw footprints in the soil, tiny ones, continuing behind the tent. I was too terrified to follow them. In the morning, I found I'd overslept. My watch said 10 a.m., but the sky was still the same grayish hue, giving me the impression it was dawn. I crawled out, stiff and hungry. Max was gone again. Panic spiked. I checked around the immediate area, calling his name. No answer. That's when I noticed my belongings were strewn about. The cooler knocked over, cans scattered, my backpack missing entirely. I spotted a trail of footprints and drag marks leading off towards the homestead. Cursing, I set off, determined to retrieve my stuff. As I approached the cabin, a stench of death wafted through the air. My stomach churned. In the distance, I saw something large and red. My backpack, half buried in the dirt near an open pit behind the house. The smell was stronger there. I forced myself to look inside the pit. My eyes widened in horror. Bones lay jumbled in the mud. Some looked distinctly human, ribs, a skull with bits of decayed flesh clinging to it. Others belonged to animals. My backpack was spattered with some unidentifiable black gunk. I reached for it, noticing lumps of cloth and porcelain tangled among the bones. The same doll, except there were multiple, all with cracked faces. One had half a head missing, another had an arm broken off. They looked like they'd been burned or smashed, then thrown in this pit. I gagged, covering my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. I snatched my backpack, rummaging to see if anything was still in it. Most of my supplies were gone. My water bottles were intact, though. I took one, gulping greedily. That's when I saw a small shape a few feet away, covered in dried blood. My heart skipped a beat. It was Max's collar, the tags jingling faintly in the breeze. My breath caught in a sob. I whirled around, scanning for him. I'd never felt so terrified in my life. I found footprints leading away from the pit into the tall grass. Some of them looked like dog tracks, but they were smudged. I hurried after them, tears burning my eyes. Then I heard a low, raspy bark. Relief flooded me, and I sprinted toward the sound. I found Max standing stock still among the grass. He turned to me slowly, head tilted at an odd angle. No collar. His eyes were unnaturally wide, his posture was all wrong. Still, stiff. I almost fell to my knees in relief anyway. "Max!" I cried, stepping forward. He stared at me. Something was wrong in his expression, a vacancy that made my blood run cold. Slowly I knelt, extending my hand. He sniffed it, but his breathing was shallow. I expected him to wag his tail, or at least show some recognition. Instead, he just pressed his nose to my palm, and a low whine rumbled in his throat. He turned and walked off, deeper into the grass. I followed, but he soon vanished behind a patch of overgrowth. When I emerged into a clearing, he was gone. Frustration and dread warred in my gut. Tears stung my eyes. What the hell is happening here? I decided I couldn't waste more time. I had to leave, even if it meant leaving my car behind. I'd walk until I found a road or a house. One of the local ranches might be an hour or two away on foot. I had a compass in my backpack. However, when I pulled it out, the needle spun in slow circles, never settling. My map was another story. The ink had smeared as though water had been spilled across it, rendering it illegible. I started trudging in what I believed was east. The entire time, I was hounded by an incessant feeling that I was being watched. My thoughts looped. I should just keep going straight. But after an hour, I began noticing the landscape repeating. The same twisted tree, the same broken fence post. I was somehow walking in circles, though I was absolutely sure I was keeping my direction consistent. The overcast sky never changed, so I couldn't navigate by the sun. My watch read 12:17 p.m., then jumped to 1:42 p.m. in the span of a minute, then froze at 12:17 again. My sense of time frayed. Every time I paused to gather myself, I heard faint whispers in the wind. My name, repeated over and over, as though said by a small child. I stumbled onto my own footprints for the third time, returning to the same campsite. Furious despair seized me, and I hurled a rock at the smoldering remains of my campfire. Then I realized my tent had been slashed open. The stakes were pulled from the ground, and the fabric had been carved like someone wielded a knife. My pulse thundered in my ears. Inside the tent, I found my sleeping bag unzipped, spread out like a body, with what looked like dried blood at the edges. I checked myself. No wounds, not that I could see. The blood must have come from somewhere else. Nausea clawed up my throat. By this point, fear was overriding my ability to think straight. I turned around, determined to gather as much as I could and just keep moving, even if I walked all night. But I heard panting behind me. Max. He emerged from behind a tree, so silent and sudden that I yelped in surprise. He looked the same, off, quiet. Yet seeing him was a strange comfort. I whispered, "We have to leave," as if he could understand. Max stared at me, then turned his head. He padded slowly up to me, pressing his nose against my leg. I stroked his fur, tears of relief streaming down my face. I had no idea what was happening to him, but I still loved him. He was my best friend. He'd never been violent toward me before. I held him close, burying my face in his ruff. He smelled musty, damp, almost like the inside of that homestead. Without warning, he snapped at me. His teeth clacked inches from my face. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance. He advanced, growling. Spit dripped from his jaws, something wild in his eyes. "Max," I pleaded, voice trembling. He lunged. I scrambled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the fire ring. I went down hard, pain jolting up my elbow. He came at me again, snarling in a rage I'd never seen, and I instinctively kicked out, catching him in the chest. The force knocked him off balance for a moment, but he recovered. My chest tightened with panic. My sweet, loyal dog was attacking me. I couldn't process it, not rationally. I flung my backpack between us, screaming, "Stop!" but he circled around. His lips curled, revealing glistening teeth. Another lunge. I fumbled for anything, my hand closed on a piece of firewood. As Max leapt, I swung. The log collided with his skull. He yelped, staggering. Blood trickled from his mouth. Horror and heartbreak erupted inside me, but I knew he wasn't done. He recovered, crouching low, ready to pounce. I braced and swung again, tears streaming, voice cracking as I screamed. I hit him in the side, feeling the crunch of bone. He whined, spun, and sank his teeth into my arm. I howled in pain, dropping the wood. His bite was terrifyingly strong. I felt my skin tear. Adrenaline took over. I grabbed the log again, bashing him repeatedly. I'm not proud of what I did, but it was survival. At some point, his jaws released. He collapsed, breathing shallowly. I scrambled away, sobbing. Blood ran down my arm. I clutched it with my other hand, whimpering in horror and heartbreak. I watched Max struggle, a raspy wheeze escaping him. His eyes blank with that same haunting emptiness. Finally, he stopped moving altogether. I crawled to him, tears blurring my vision. Gently, I laid a trembling hand on his fur. It felt like hours before I realized I was still in danger. This place was not normal, and I needed medical help, but I couldn't leave him like that, not half buried in the dirt. So, with my wounded arm throbbing, I dug in the soft ground behind a grove of trees until I had a shallow grave. Every movement was agony, physically and emotionally. I placed Max inside with the greatest care, whispering goodbye through tears. It was the worst moment of my life. By the time I stumbled back to my tent area, the sky was no darker or brighter than before. My watch read 3:12 p.m., then a few minutes later, jumped back to 12:01 p.m. My entire sense of time was unraveling. I rummaged in my supplies for a first aid kit, shaking as I cleaned and bandaged the wound on my arm. The bite stung like fire. My tears wouldn't stop. Then I heard a voice behind me. It was male. "You never loved me," it said, soft but clear as day. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. No one. Just a faint outline of a person in my peripheral vision, gone the instant I tried to focus on it. But the voice had sounded so real, and I recognized it with a jolt. It was my ex's voice. I staggered, my head spinning. "Who's there?" I shouted. My words echoed back, mocking me in the silence. My ex was nowhere near North Dakota. He was across the country. The shadow that had flitted in the corner of my eye was gone. My mind reeled with confusion and fear. Something was feeding off me, twisting my memories, my emotions, using the voice of a person who had once told me I was worthless. Was it the doll, or was it the land itself? I ran for the homestead, a wild desperation fueling me. My logic was that the doll was the source of this nightmare. Every time I saw it, strange things escalated. If I destroyed it, maybe I'd break whatever curse or madness gripped this place. I had no other plan. I just wanted it to end. When I got to the homestead, it looked different. The walls were more intact, the furniture upright, as if time had rewound. It wasn't a wrecked ruin anymore. A faint lantern glow flickered through a window that hadn't been there before. My heart hammered. I stepped through the threshold expecting the same musty odor. Instead, I smelled fresh candle wax and something metallic, like old blood. My vision wavered. I blinked, and the interior was once again half rotten, caved in. Another blink, and it was sturdy, the floor unscratched. My sense of reality flickered as if I existed between two overlapping worlds. I heard a child's giggle in one corner. My flashlight landed on a small figure. A girl, her hair braided, wearing a dingy dress. She had the doll in her arms. I couldn't see her face in the shadows. She whispered, "Come play with us," in a voice that chilled my blood. I stepped forward, gritting my teeth. She was gone in the blink of an eye, but the doll remained, standing upright on its own 2 porcelain feet. Its face was turned to me and it smiled, or seemed to. A hairline crack ran down its cheek. The eyes glimmered. I grabbed it, ignoring the revulsion coursing through me, and I flung it to the floor as hard as I could, the porcelain shattered, shards scattering. Inside I glimpsed something black, ropey and moving, like tendrils of decayed flesh. Before I could fully process it, the shards started pulling themselves back together, each piece drifting across the floor. I screamed in frustration and stomped on the largest hunk. It crunched under my boot. The black tendrils writhed, hissing out a thick, dark fluid. A wave of cold rolled through the room. Another child's voice moaned in pain, one that twisted mid-sound into a shrill adult scream. I stumbled back, yanked my lighter from my pocket, and fumbled for matches. In my half-crazed mind, I thought fire was the only real solution. My hands trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the matches. Finally, I struck one and tossed it onto the black ooze. At first, it just smoldered, but I grabbed a strip of rotted cloth from the floor, set it aflame, then pressed it against the mass. The stuff hissed, letting off a nauseating stench of sulfur and rot, then burst into a small blue fire. The shrill screaming intensified, echoing all around me. It was too much. I bolted outside, coughed in the fresh air, tears stinging my eyes from the fumes. The screams continued for a moment, then died to a faint wail. In the distance, thunder rumbled, though the sky showed no lightning. My heart pounded with the faintest spark of hope. Maybe that ended it. But the pit behind the homestead was still there, and so were the other dolls. I braced myself, found a discarded can of lighter fluid in the rubble of an old shed, and returned to the pit. The smell turned my stomach. I forced myself to climb down into that disgusting cavity among the bones. Porcelain fragments littered the space. Some dolls were intact, others broken or half-melted by who knew what. I poured the lighter fluid over them, tears spilling as I tried not to look too closely at the bones of the pit's previous victims. I flicked another match. Fire consumed them, one by one. Each time a doll caught flame, an unearthly wail rose. It was almost like hearing souls tear themselves free. I felt no pity, only horror. The flames danced blue, green, and orange, sizzling in the damp. The stench was overpowering. My eyes watered and I coughed violently. A wet scraping sound startled me. One of the dolls was half crawling. A porcelain stump for an arm, the other intact arm clawing at the dirt. Its mouth hinged open, revealing rows of small human-looking teeth. Without hesitation, I poured the last of the lighter fluid over it and dropped my match. It shrieked in a voice I'll never forget, high-pitched, inhuman, and layered with countless echoes. I climbed out of the pit, stumbling away as the entire mass burned. I can't say how long I knelt there, trembling, panting. The flames eventually consumed the black mass, leaving behind sooty lumps and a reek that coated my nostrils. My arm throbbed from Max's bite, blood crusting the bandage. The edges of my vision swam with exhaustion. My watch read 11:59, though I couldn't say if that was day or night. The sky was still that uniform gray, a twilight that never changed. I heard footsteps behind me. A man's voice. "Olivia?" it said. My ex's voice again. "You never loved me enough." I turned, heart pounding, and saw a figure in the near dark. He wore the same clothes my ex had the last time I saw him, but his limbs bent at odd angles. The face was blurred, as though I were looking at him through frosted glass. I backed up, shaking my head. "You're not real," I whispered. The figure advanced. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from near the pit, brandishing it. The figure paused, flickered, then vanished like smoke on the wind. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, as if a bubble had popped. A breath of wind rustled the tall grasses. For the first time in days, I heard an actual breeze. Relief swept through me. I half laughed, half sobbed, stumbling toward my campsite. I was ready to gather my gear and just keep walking. But the strangest thing happened. I actually found a narrow dirt path leading away from the homestead, one I could have sworn wasn't there before. Without questioning it, I took it. I walked for what felt like hours. The wound on my arm burned, my energy low, but hope kept me going. The path seemed more straightforward than before. Occasionally, I glimpsed the fence line of a ranch, or the shimmer of the little Missouri River in the distance. Then my foot caught a stone, and I collapsed onto my hands and knees, panting. Night must have come, because now it was pitch black. Or maybe it was still the same unchanging gloom. My watch was broken. My sense of time was in tatters. I dragged myself forward until my vision blurred. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness. I squinted, hardly believing it. Was this real? The shape of a pickup truck approached on a small side road. I waved my arms desperately. The truck's brakes squealed. The driver got out. A man in dusty jeans, a cowboy hat. Through my delirium, I mumbled something about needing help. He rushed over, concern etched on his face. That's the last memory I have of being in the grassland. I woke up in a small rural hospital in Watford City, an IV in my arm. The smell of antiseptic was oddly comforting. A nurse told me a local rancher had found me passed out on a back road. I asked about my dog, but no one had seen him. I broke down sobbing. They asked me what happened. I told them bits and pieces, about the homestead, the dolls, the slash in my tires. I must have sounded insane. The nurse gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder and told me to rest. Over the next few days, I recovered physically. The bite on my arm took stitches. They tested me for rabies, among other things, but found nothing conclusive. The doctor said it was an animal bite, but not from any dog he'd seen. That only fueled my nightmares. When the police came to question me, I told them about the cursed property. They looked skeptical, but said they'd send someone to check it out. They never found it, or if they did, they never told me. The location I described didn't match anything on the official maps, and the roads changed. They chalked it up to me being in shock or lost. I had no explanation. I left the hospital and tried to get my life back on track. I was never the same person, though. My nights were torn by nightmares. Fire in a pit full of bones. Max's eyes glazed in that final moment, and the doll's expressionless porcelain face reforming from shards. I saw psychiatrists, took meds, tried hypnotherapy. Nothing erased that primal sense of dread. Months later, I rented a tiny studio in a different city, hoping distance would help. I found a job as a graphic designer for a small firm and tried to bury the memories in work. Then, one afternoon, I got a package with no return address. I assumed it was a surprise from a new friend or something from my mother. I slit the tape carefully with a box cutter. My heart froze the instant I pulled away the brown paper inside. It was the doll, whole, uncracked. Its eyes sparkled in the overhead light, just as wet and lifelike as before. Tucked into its porcelain arms was Max's dog tag, the metal engraved with his name and my old phone number. As I stared in horror, I noticed something else. Next to the dog tag was a single small tooth. White, child-sized. A note was pinned to the doll's dress. Now, we're together forever. I dropped the box, my breath tearing out in ragged sobs. A wave of nausea overtook me. For a moment, I was back in that pit. the heat of the blue fire brushing against my skin. I heard that same shrill wailing. I fumbled for my phone, which was working fine now, and did the only thing I could think of. I hurled the box, the doll, and the note into my oven. Then I turned the temperature to the highest setting and stood there, tears streaming, until I smelled burning porcelain and cloth. I let it bake until the smoke alarm shrieked. By the time I opened the oven door, the doll was cracked and blackened, the dog tag fused to the metal. I threw open every window to let out the smoke, ignoring the neighbors who pounded on my door. I can't say whether I'm free of it or if I've only bought myself some time. Some nights, I swear I hear that child's voice outside my window. My reflection in mirrors blinks a second too late. The memory of Max's last moments haunts me daily. The question always there. Was it truly him, or was he already gone, replaced by something evil? I may never know. That's the end of my story, or as much an end as I can give. If you ever find yourself lost in the Little Missouri National Grassland, and you see an old homestead that shouldn't be there, don't go inside. If you come across a porcelain doll with eyes that seem wet, walk the other way. Don't stop to check it out. Don't linger. And if you smell smoke from a pit you can't see, run. Because sometimes the quiet corners of this world are the devil's playground, and you might never escape the horrors that dwell there. My name is Jackson Halloran. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in August 2023. I'm not a soldier or some hardened survivalist. I'm a high school science teacher from Bismarck, North Dakota. The only reason I decided to spend a week off the grid in Little Missouri State Park was because I needed time away from civilization. Time to process my recent divorce and my father's passing. Looking back, I guess I was hoping for some kind of spiritual reset. I got that in a way, but not in any form I'd wish on anyone. I set out on a dry, blistering Thursday afternoon, my dog Roscoe panting happily by my side. He's a black lab mix, about 5 years old, with a big heart and a tail that never seemed to stop wagging. At least, that used to be the case. We left my pickup truck near the park's entrance and hiked inward, off-trail, deeper than I'd ever gone before. This portion of Little Missouri State Park sprawls across rugged, otherworldly badlands. Hills striped with clay and sandstone, dotted with juniper and pine. My plan was simple. Find a bluffside clearing by the river, pitch my tent, and spend the next 6 nights journaling, reading, and decompressing. I remember the first 2 days passing almost too quietly. Roscoe would trot at the perimeter of our little camp, sniffing the air whenever a breeze carried in from the hoodoos. I spent those afternoons exploring the area, noting interesting rock formations, collecting little bits of petrified wood, and scribbling in my journal. My father had always loved geology, and I felt close to him that way, like I was continuing his curiosity about the shapes and textures of the land. The nights were peaceful at first, the sky glittering with more stars than you'd think possible. On the second evening, after I'd cooked some freeze-dried chili over my portable stove, I noticed something peculiar. My phone, which I'd put on airplane mode to conserve battery, was dead. As in completely out of juice, even though it had been nearly full that morning. No biggie, I thought. I came here to disconnect anyway. Besides, I still had my solar-powered battery pack, but when I hooked the phone up to it, nothing happened. It was as if the phone just decided it was time to die, and that was that. Roscoe lay curled up nearby, occasionally lifting his head to sniff at the air. A subtle unease crept up my spine. I shrugged it off as city boy nerves. I told myself, you're here to be alone, so be alone. The next day, the real trouble began. I'd gone to check my GPS unit to confirm the perimeter I was exploring, but the screen kept blinking in and out. It showed me on a straight route one moment, then jerked my location about 2 miles away the next. Thinking it was just a glitch, I shut it off and then turned it back on. It refused to boot properly. The small map I'd brought, a paper map I'd unfolded at the start, wasn't matching what I was seeing in person. There were ridges on the map that didn't exist in front of me, and vice versa. I couldn't decide if the map was outdated, or if I'd wandered into an uncharted portion. In a park this large, maybe that wasn't so surprising. That afternoon was the first time I saw him. A young boy, no older than 8 or 9, standing near the edge of the water by the riverbank. I froze, uncertain whether to call out. This was miles from any official trail, and I hadn't seen signs of other campers. He wore a simple white t-shirt and what looked like tattered shorts, barefoot, half covered in a film of mud and algae. Roscoe saw him too, or at least sensed him, and started growling. My dog had never been aggressive towards children. In fact, he loved kids. Yet there he was, hackles raised, lips curled back, a low rumble in his chest. The boy turned his head slowly and stared at us. He looked blank. No fear, no relief, just a staring face with wide eyes that glinted in the sunlight like polished stone. I called out, "Hey, kid, are you lost?" He made no move, didn't even blink. Then, without a word, he backed away from the water and disappeared behind a rocky outcropping. I hurried after him, shouting that I wouldn't hurt him, that I was just trying to help. But when I reached the spot, he was gone. No footprints in the wet sand, no sign of his bare feet on the stony riverbank. Confused, I scanned the area. Nothing. Roscoe whimpered, and I realized he was trembling. The next night, the land seemed different. The air was thick, and the wind made a strange howling sound across the ridges. I'd set up a fire just after dusk, using a ring of stones I'd gathered. I tried to light a small blaze with my lighter and some kindling, but it flared a peculiar blue for a moment and then died out abruptly. I tried again. Same thing. An otherworldly flash of blue, then darkness. After a few attempts, I managed to coax an orange flame out of it, but it flickered weakly, as though the wood itself resisted burning. Roscoe kept pacing around the site, stepping in and out of the weak firelight with a soft whine in his throat. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of Roscoe barking like crazy. My tent was lit by the pale glow of the moon. A shape moved just beyond the thin canvas. I held my breath. It looked like a small figure, hunched, scanning the tent's surface. Then I heard a whisper, so soft I nearly wrote it off as my own heartbeat, but the words were unmistakable. "He's wearing your skin." I jolted upright. My heart hammered. As soon as I grabbed my flashlight, the figure melted away into the shadows. I unzipped the tent and saw no one. The wind rustled the spindly juniper branches overhead, but out by the edge of my campsite I saw them. Small footprints in the dust, about the size a child would leave. They led off into the darkness. The next morning, as dawn broke, I realized my backpack was gone. I'd left it near a boulder by the tent. I found it 30 yards away, turned upside down, its contents scattered. My ration packs had rotted overnight, as though they'd been left out for months. The smell was stomach-turning. Rancid, slimy pouches that had once contained freeze-dried meals. The canteen was still full, but the water had a foul taste when I took a sip. I spit it out instantly, cursing under my breath. How was this possible? Food doesn't just disintegrate in the space of a night. My hands shook as I gathered the remains and put them in a trash bag to keep the stench contained. Roscoe whined near a path of footprints that seemed to appear and then vanish, half sunken in a patch of dried mud. They were child-sized, the toes pointed inward at a strange angle. My mind kept going back to that little boy I'd seen. How was he surviving out here with no supplies, no shoes, apparently no guardians? Something wasn't adding up, and a creeping dread told me to leave. But the whole point was to get away for a week. I was stubborn. I told myself that I'd push on just a little longer, maybe find a vantage point on a nearby bluff to see if there were other campers or rangers around who could help with the weirdness. That afternoon, as I tried to navigate up a narrow ravine, my GPS unit blinked out completely. I tried turning it back on. Nothing. Defeated, I stuffed it into my pocket. The sun was beating down, and I realized I was more dehydrated than I should be. My father's old compass still hung from my belt loop, so I took it out to get some sense of direction. The needle spun lazily, then pointed north. I aimed myself toward it, hoping to find a vantage point. Roscoe followed, tail low, ears tucked back. After an exhausting scramble up loose rocks, I reached a sloping plateau. The view should have been spectacular, but the sky looked hazy, as if a fine mist had settled over the entire region. I could still see the winding ribbon of the Little Missouri River, but the banks looked off, almost as though they'd shifted. I planned to sit and map out the area, to figure out the best route back toward my truck. But as I unrolled my paper map, I realized the topography was wrong. The map had a ridge marked in bold lines that should be in front of me, but there was just open air. Yet to my left, where the map showed level ground, I saw a deep chasm. For a moment, I thought I'd brought the wrong map, or that it was some cheap bootleg. Then I noticed the official park logos. It was the correct map. It was everything else that seemed to have changed. A sudden rasping noise made me spin around. Roscoe let out a ferocious snarl, but it died in his throat. There, a few yards away, was the boy again. He was barefoot, caked in mud, his shirt hanging in tatters. This time, he spoke. He went the wrong way. Now time goes wrong. His voice barely rose above a whisper, yet the words hit me like a punch in the gut. I asked who he was, but he turned and drifted behind a spire of rock. Roscoe barked once and sprang forward. When I ran after him, I found nothing but a dead end of rock walls. The boy had vanished. Roscoe whined and yelped as though in pain, then darted back toward me, limping on his hind leg. I checked him for injuries and found a swelling bruise along his side. It was as if something had slammed him sideways into the stone. Had that child done it? The thought was impossible and ridiculous, yet the bruising on my dog's ribs was very real. By the time we returned to the campsite, the sun was setting. I tried to build another fire, and once again the flames sputtered and nearly died, flickering in that strange blue hue. I don't know why, but I was exhausted. My entire body felt like it had been working for days without rest. Collapsing into my tent, I stared at the nylon ceiling, listening to Roscoe's ragged breathing. I drifted off into a restless sleep, haunted by half-formed images of my dad. He was standing in the hallway of our old home whispering, "He's wearing your skin. He's wearing your skin." I woke up with my heart in my throat. Something was wrong inside the tent. I was cold, my sleeping bag bunched under my feet. I reached around in the dark, feeling only empty space. Roscoe was gone. The tent zipper was closed, though. I scrambled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't click on. The phone was dead, so no help there. When I finally yanked the tent door open, the moonlight revealed that my sleeping bag had been unzipped from the inside. I had no memory of doing that. Worse, there were footprints in the dirt, small, bare footprints leading away. I called for Roscoe, panic constricting my chest. The night offered no reply except the wind's moan. I fumbled with my pack, searching for my spare flashlight. My hands trembled so violently that it took a few tries just to get it turned on. As soon as the beam cut through the darkness, I followed the footprints. They led me out of the campsite and down a slope toward the river. Halfway there, the trail of prints vanished. I found no sign of Roscoe. What I did see was an odd indentation on the ground, shaped vaguely like a body, as though someone had slept on the bare earth. Strange symbols were scratched in the dirt nearby, spirals that made my eyes water when I looked at them too long. The spirals seemed to expand inwards or outwards. I couldn't tell which direction they turned. They almost seemed alive. I was about to step closer when my flashlight flickered, leaving me in darkness. In that fleeting moment, I felt something, breathing close by. I spun around but couldn't see anyone. Then the light flared back to life and I was alone. The place silent as a tomb. The footprints, the spirals, they were all that remained to suggest anything had been there. Chilled to the bone, I retreated to my tent, calling Roscoe's name until my voice was raw. When dawn arrived, I found Roscoe sitting calmly by the ashes of the dead fire, wagging his tail. Relief flooded through me. I rushed over to him, kneeling down to check if he was hurt. He licked my face once, but something in his eyes seemed different. They looked dull, and his tail wagged a bit too mechanically. I tried to reassure myself that my fear was making me see things. I fed him some of the leftover jerky, one of the few things that didn't rot in my bag, and he ate it slowly, as though tasting it for the first time in his life. I patted his flank, which was still bruised, but he didn't flinch. That was weird. Normally he'd whimper at even a light touch if he was wounded. Now he acted like he couldn't feel a thing. Deciding I couldn't handle another day in this bizarre limbo, I packed up my tent. My plan was to hike back to the truck and maybe drive into a nearby town for help, or at least a place to rest. As I was packing, I noticed my watch read 3:17. I tapped the glass. It didn't budge. I wound it, but the second hand stayed stuck. Thinking the battery died, I tossed it into my pack. Then I realized it was an old mechanical watch, a gift from my dad, battery-free. I tried not to think too much about it. My steps felt heavier with each stride. The closer I got to where I remembered leaving my truck, the more the terrain seemed to twist. I kept spotting the same bent juniper tree, the same rock with a swirl of quartz in it. It was like I was walking in circles, even though I made a conscious effort to keep the sun at my back to maintain a straight path. At one point, I swore I saw two versions of my old campsite. One fresh and neat, the other charred and ashy. They both flickered at the edges of my vision, and then were gone. Roscoe trotted calmly alongside me, never letting out so much as a bark or whine. The silence from him was eerie. I tried to talk to him, but I felt ridiculous, carrying on a conversation with my dog in the middle of the wilderness. Normally, he'd at least cock his head or wag his tail in a comforting manner. Now, he just stared blankly, like a statue come to life. Time blurred. The sun hung in the sky far too long. It was late evening by the time I realized I was lost again. My father's compass needle kept spinning gently, never settling. The wind had picked up, a hot, dusty breath that carried faint whispers in a language I didn't recognize. When I reached an outcropping that overlooked the river, I collapsed. My whole body ached. Beside me, Roscoe just sat, head cocked, staring at nothing. A chill coursed through me as I remembered the words the boy had said. He went the wrong way. Now time goes wrong. Was that referring to me? This was insane. I forced myself up, hobbling onward until I found what looked like a seldom-used ranger trail. It was the first man-made sign I'd seen in days. My pulse quickened. Maybe I could follow it out of this nightmare. Darkness was falling rapidly, so I used my last bits of energy to set up a makeshift camp off the side of that path. I didn't even bother lighting a fire. The few sticks and branches I collected felt slimy, and the memory of that blue flame made my stomach churn. That night, I slipped in and out of a feverish sleep. half expecting something to sneak into my camp. At one point, I heard voices, familiar voices. My father's baritone, my own voice, and that of the boy. They seemed to be talking quietly, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard footsteps. Dragging footsteps, like someone with an injured leg. I peeked out of my half-open sleeping bag and saw a figure standing at the edge of the faint moonlight. It looked like a woman, hair tangled, clothes torn. She saw me and froze. We stared at each other for a long, tense moment. She spoke first. "Hello?" I cleared my throat, my voice raspy. "Hi," I said. "Are you okay?" She shuffled closer. She looked around my age, mid-30s, exhausted, eyes bloodshot. She introduced herself as Karen. She claimed she'd gotten separated from her group, that she'd been wandering for 2 days. I sat up, heart pounding with a bizarre mix of dread and relief. Another human being. Maybe we could find a way out together. Karen joined me near the flicker of my dim flashlight. She accepted a little water from my canteen, grimacing at the taste, but she drank anyway. I asked if she'd seen a child out here, maybe wearing a tattered shirt. She shook her head violently, then let out something between a laugh and a sob. She said she'd encountered someone who looked like a child, but that it was all wrong. It had whispered things about her family back home, things no one else would know. Then it vanished. Karen's eyes filled with tears as she described how her own phone and map had failed her. Then she saw her friend. Only it wasn't her friend, just something wearing his face. She'd fled. My spine tingled with recognition. This was too close to my own experience. As the night wore on, we huddled in that tiny campsite, trying to stay awake. Roscoe lay motionless at the edge of the flashlight's glow, occasionally glancing at Karen with a steady, unnerving gaze. I told her about the rotting food, the missing backpack, the footprints around my tent. She added her own horror stories. Her campsite had simply vanished one morning. Her watch read times that made no sense. She swore she'd set out with enough supplies for a weekend trip, but everything was spoiled when she opened her pack. We decided to head out at first light to keep each other company and hopefully stand a better chance of returning to civilization. But before dawn, exhaustion got the better of me. I woke to a faint sound, a soft, wet noise. I opened my eyes to see Karen hunched over me, her face slack, her eyes empty. She was holding my father's compass in her hand, twisting it. My mouth went dry as she whispered, "He's wearing your skin," in the same tone the boy had used. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She raised something shiny in her other hand. A knife. I tried to scramble away, but my sleeping bag tangled around my legs. I kicked, panic blooming in my chest. Karen's face contorted into a grin that stretched too wide. Then she slammed the blade down toward my throat. I threw my arm up to block it. The blade bit into my forearm, and I screamed. Blood spattered across the dusty ground. Karen hissed something. Nonsensical words that sounded guttural, ancient. Adrenaline surged, and I managed to roll away, wresting the knife from her grip. She let out a shriek, high-pitched and inhuman, then lurched at me again. My mind spun, and I acted on a sudden, desperate impulse. I drove the knife up under her ribs. She coughed, eyes widening in shock, and collapsed onto me. I pushed her off, the blade still in my grip. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled backward, clutching my bleeding arm. She was alive, but her breathing was shallow. Then she started laughing, a low, horrible laugh that echoed in the silent night. Her mouth frothed with blood, yet she still managed a few words. "It's never going to let you go." Then her eyes rolled up and her body went limp. My entire being reeled. I'd just stabbed someone, maybe killed them. I didn't know if it was Karen or something wearing Karen's face. My arm stung and I felt dizzy. Roscoe sat off to the side, watching the scene. No barking, no reaction, just that unblinking stare. I crawled to my pack, bandaged my arm with a spare shirt, and forced myself to check Karen's pulse. It was there, faint, but I didn't know how to help her. She'd tried to kill me, or something inside her had tried. My moral compass warred with my survival instinct. Fear won out. I dragged myself away from her. She had tried to slice my throat. How could I possibly trust her now? I must have passed out from blood loss or shock. When I came to, the sun was up. Karen was gone. A dark stain on the ground showed where she'd bled. I saw footprints leading away, but I wasn't about to follow. Terror rattled my teeth. My arm screamed in pain with every slight movement. I ripped up some more cloth for a tighter makeshift bandage, then tried to move. I had to get help, or I'd bleed out or go mad. Staggering to my feet, I began walking down what I hoped was the ranger path. Roscoe padded behind me. Strangely, the pain in my arm sharpened my focus. The dizziness came in waves, but I pressed on. Each hour felt like 3. The sun's position didn't seem to match the time I felt. I walked for what felt like half the day, but the sun refused to climb higher than mid-morning. When I checked my watch, it still read 3:17. I tore it off and threw it away. Around midday, whatever that meant in this place, I found the campsite again. My campsite. Only, it wasn't as I'd left it. The tent was burned to ashes, the ground charred black. I recognized the rock circle where I'd tried to make a fire. Now, nothing but shards of melted stone. Everything was cold, as if it had burned out long ago. Heart hammering, I stumbled backward and my foot caught on something. It was my backpack, or what remained of it. The canvas brittle and disintegrating. In confusion, I picked it up, and it crumbled in my hands. A wave of panic hit me. This was impossible. I just had my pack with me. I was wearing it, in fact. A quick check confirmed that yes, the pack was still on my back. Yet there it was at my feet, decayed beyond recognition. Roscoe let out a keening whine. Then, without warning, he started speaking. It was my father's voice that emerged from his throat. "You left me to die. You left your mother." I screamed. My dog's jaws moved, but his eyes stayed vacant. The voice rattled on, "You always run, Jack." Then Roscoe shook, convulsed, and collapsed. A moment later he rose up, but now his lips curled back in a twisted approximation of a grin. He padded toward me. I could see something wrong in his gait, as if each leg moved with a jerk. I lifted the hunting knife, the same one I'd used against Karen. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold it. Roscoe sniffed the air, then growled. Without warning, he lunged. All I could do was thrust the blade out. It caught him under the chest. The momentum carried him onto me, and we both went down hard. I felt his hot breath on my face, the acrid smell of old blood. But then he went limp. In a horrifying moment, black sludge seeped from the wound, thick and tar-like, coating my hand and arm. It stank of sulfur and decay. My stomach clenched, and I shoved his body off, retching onto the ground. Tears burned my eyes. Roscoe, my best friend. What the hell had I just done? For a second, I thought he might be truly dead, but then his limbs twitched, and something that wasn't my dog looked out from behind those eyes. It was the same emptiness I'd seen in that child's stare. An unspoken horror seized me, and I scrambled away, tossing aside the knife. The creature that had been Roscoe lay still, but I could hear a wet clicking sound from inside its throat, as if it was trying to speak again. Finally, it stopped moving altogether. I stumbled through the swirling dust, away from the burned campsite. I didn't care which direction, I just wanted to be gone. My mind whirled with guilt, terror, and confusion. My father's face kept flashing in my memory, superimposed with that child's pale eyes. I lost all sense of time. The sky hung in perpetual twilight, not quite day, not quite night. My forearm was throbbing, and the bandage was soaked with fresh blood. If I didn't find help soon, I'd bleed to death. That was when I discovered a narrow cave entrance hidden behind a cluster of scrub pines. It felt like a risk to go inside, but I could hear the wind picking up behind me, carrying faint echoes of laughter or sobbing. I couldn't tell which. Desperate for some kind of shelter, I ducked into the cave. The interior was dimly lit by pockets of sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted, I saw patterns drawn on the walls. More spirals, lines connecting them. Crude figures that looked like people with elongated limbs. Despite every fiber of my being screaming to get out, I moved deeper. My flashlight flickered to life. I have no idea why it decided to work then, and revealed a horrifying sight. Remnants of old camp gear littered the floor. A rusted stove, a half-molded sleeping bag, and fragments of clothing. Some of the items looked downright ancient, while others seemed relatively new. It was as if people had been drawn here over decades, leaving behind their possessions as the cave swallowed them. Then my flashlight beam caught something that made my heart skip. A trail cam, battered but intact, mounted on the wall. I recognized it because I'd bought the same model a year ago for a nature project at school. I pried it free, finding the SD card still inside. My curiosity overrode my fear, and I tucked the camera under my arm, continuing deeper into the cave. The corridor opened into a small chamber. At the center lay a circle of stones, with a pool of black liquid in the middle. A smell like rotting flowers and burnt hair filled the space. I heard a voice from behind me, soft as a spider's thread. "You'll be perfect. No one's left in you now." Spinning around, I saw the boy standing in the entrance, his eyes two inky pits. He had no shoes, and his arms were too long for his body. He advanced slowly, head tilting, a grin forming. My flashlight flickered and died. For a moment, I could see nothing but the faint glow from the cracks in the cave's ceiling. The boy's silhouette stepped closer. I could feel him radiating cold. Instinct screamed for me to run, but I found myself frozen. He whispered in that quiet, dreadful voice, "Come with me. I can take away the hurt." I tried to speak, to say something, but no sound emerged. In a burst of adrenaline, I flung the trail cam at him and dove for the entrance. The child didn't even flinch as the camera smashed against his chest and clattered to the ground. Instead, he laughed, a high, grating noise that seemed to reverberate through the rocks. I scrambled down the dark passage, clawing at the walls. By some miracle, I made it out of the cave and into the open air. Night had fallen again. Or maybe it had never truly been day. The swirling confusion of the park's terrain enveloped me, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I told myself I had to find a vantage point, set up a signal fire, do something to get out of here. That was all that mattered. It must have been hours. My body was on the verge of collapse when I stumbled into a small clearing. At the center stood a rickety wooden tower, maybe an old ranger lookout. I scrambled up the ladder, ignoring the shooting pain in my arm. At the top, I found a rotted platform with rusted metal railing. From there, I could see the moonlit badlands stretch out for miles. My heart soared at the chance to orient myself. Then I felt the boards shift beneath my weight. If they broke, I'd drop 20 feet onto rocks, but I couldn't go back down, not yet. Fighting down waves of dizziness, I scanned the horizon. Did I see headlights? Maybe. A flicker of light in the distance. It gave me a shred of hope. If I could just keep moving that way, maybe I'd reach a road. As I turned to climb back down, a new wave of dizziness struck. My vision blurred. Then I saw him again, standing in the clearing below, the boy. I could hear his voice in my head, though his lips never moved. "You took the wrong path. Time can't move right anymore." The rotted ladder quivered as I climbed down. My injured arm burned with every rung. When I touched ground, the boy was gone. But in his place stood Roscoe, alive, tail wagging. My chest tightened. I knew this wasn't my real dog. I'd seen my real dog die. This Roscoe had eyes black as pitch, just like the boy. It approached, tail wagging, then parted its jaws as if to speak. I couldn't bear it. With a burst of raw, feral fear, I swung the old hunting knife at it, screaming. The dog vanished into thin air, leaving only the echo of a whimper on the breeze. I forced my battered body forward, using the faint light from the moon to guide me toward where I thought I'd seen those headlights. The land seemed to warp around me. Ridges became valleys, gullies leading nowhere, the air thick with a sense of wrongness. My father's voice hissed in my ear, or maybe it was the wind. It said things about how I was a disappointment, how I always ran from responsibility, how I deserved this fate. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. I pressed on. At some point, I collapsed. My legs just gave out under me, and I landed face first in the dust. The pain in my arm was unbearable, my entire body shaking with shock. If I gave up, I knew I'd die here. Maybe that was preferable to the endless nightmare of illusions and twisted time. Darkness threatened to swallow me. Then, with a surge of desperation, I pulled out my father's compass, miraculously still at my belt. The glass was cracked, the needle twitching aimlessly. I remembered my father's face, how he used to encourage me when I felt lost or scared. I don't know if it was a hallucination or divine mercy, but the compass needle steadied for just a moment, pointing east. I followed that direction, crawling when I had to, limping when I could stand. Eventually, I found myself on a rocky slope that led down toward a narrow dirt road. I nearly cried in relief. My soul soared at the sight of something so plainly man-made. With what strength I had left, I half ran, half stumbled down the slope until my feet touched the dusty track. I saw tire marks, still faintly visible in the moonlight. I was saved. I would follow this road until I hit a main route or a ranger station, or encountered a passing car. I wish I could say that's the end of it, that I escaped and everything went back to normal, but it didn't. As I followed the road, my vision started to flicker. At one point, it looked as though the road itself was cracked and broken, replaced by jagged black rock. Then it was normal again. My sense of time kept slipping. I'd walk for what felt like hours, and the moon wouldn't move. Then it would drop suddenly, as though hours passed in a blink, plunging me into total darkness. My injured arm might as well have been on fire. At last, after more torment than I can measure, I saw the glow of headlights. They illuminated the dirt road from around a bend. I staggered forward, waving my arms. A battered old truck pulled to a stop. An older man, presumably a local rancher, gaped at the sight of me. I must have looked like a ghost, filthy, bloodied, half-crazed. He didn't say a word, just helped me into the passenger seat and drove. I clung to consciousness, expecting at any moment that he'd turn into some demonic child or possessed dog, but he never did. My memories of the next few days are spotty. He took me to a small medical clinic in a near-deserted town. I was delirious with infection from the wound. The doctors said I was severely dehydrated, covered in bruises, and borderline hypothermic, despite the summer heat. I don't remember giving them my name, but they must have found my ID in my wallet. They later told me I'd been missing for 32 days. That's impossible. I'd only packed for a 6-night trip, and by my own count, I'd been out there maybe 8 or 9 days max. But the staff insisted. My ex-wife had filed a missing persons report. There'd been a small search, but no trace of me was found. Even the ranger who found my abandoned pickup said it looked like it had been there for weeks. None of it added up. I tried to tell them about the boy, about Karen, about Roscoe, about the rotting supplies and twisted time. The kindly older doctor patted my arm and said it was likely hallucinations from stress, dehydration, and infection. That's what I wanted to believe, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. As soon as I was stable enough to leave the clinic, I was taken to a hospital in Bismarck. My ex-wife visited once, looking both furious and relieved. I had no answers for her. I still don't. They asked about Roscoe, and I told them he died in an accident. I couldn't bear to describe the real horror. The local authorities asked if I might have stabbed a camper named Karen, but there was no missing person report for her. No evidence. Maybe I'd hallucinated that too, but I remember the blood, the look in her eyes when she tried to kill me, the way she laughed. Back in the safety of my apartment, I tried to forget. I tried to push the memories away, bury them under therapy sessions and medication. But each night I dream of that boy. He stands outside my bedroom window, where no child could possibly stand, and whispers, "He went the wrong way. Now time goes wrong." There's something else. In the bottom of my duffel bag, the one I took camping, I found an SD card. I assume it's from that trail cam. I've never had the courage to watch what's on it. Sometimes I hear it rattling around in the junk drawer in my kitchen, as if it wants me to remember. To this day, my father's old compass is missing. The last time I saw it, it was in my pack after I escaped the cave. For all I know, it's still out there, spinning in the dark. I'm telling this story so that maybe, in some twisted way, it helps me accept what happened. Or so it serves as a warning. If you find yourself alone in Little Missouri State Park, or anywhere for that matter, and you see a pale, barefoot boy with empty eyes, turn around. Leave immediately. Don't go the wrong way, because once you do, time unravels. You'll see your dog speak, or your best friend's face contort into a grin they never wore before, or your own soul stepping out of your body, mocking you from the shadows. And if you do encounter him, remember this. He doesn't just want your life. He wants to unmake you completely, in ways you can't imagine. I still wake up at night feeling that presence. I half expect to see small, muddy footprints in my hallway, or the blue flicker of a fire that refuses to light properly. Every time I glance at a clock, I brace for it to read 3:17. Sometimes I think I hear Roscoe's paws on the floorboards, or the faint echo of my father's voice whispering, "He's wearing your skin." But when I check, there's nothing. Just silence and the pounding of my heart. I try to tell myself that none of it was real. The official diagnosis is acute stress psychosis brought on by isolation, dehydration, and injury. The nightmares, the illusions, they say it can happen to people in extreme circumstances. That's what the rational side of me clings to. But the part of me that was out there, stumbling through warped time, knows better. I sometimes catch the scent of sulfur when I'm alone, or glance a flicker of movement in reflections, a small shape that might be a child. I tell myself I'm just haunted by the memory, but I also recall that final moment in the cave when he said, "You'll be perfect. No one's left in you now." That line rattles in my head, suggesting I left a piece of myself back there. Maybe it's still out in the badlands, or maybe it's with him. Or maybe he followed me home, and he's waiting for the right moment to finish what he started. So far, I've managed to keep living. I go to work, I teach classes. My students have no idea what I endured. They just think I'm a bit paranoid, that I lock the classroom door too often and look over my shoulder when the hallway is empty. They don't see the nightmares. the goosebumps that rise on my arms when the intercom crackles, or the images that flash in my head if I see a barefoot child running down the street. Sometimes after school, I drive toward the outskirts of town, park on a dirt road, and stare at the horizon. I watch the sky turn orange and purple, hoping to see something that confirms or denies what happened. But the horizon remains silent. I've never returned to Little Missouri State Park. I don't plan to. And yet, some nights, I'm drawn to the idea like a moth to a flame. The sense of unfinished business, the need for an answer. If there's a moral to any of this, it might be this. Some places don't follow our rules. If you sense that kind of wrongness, trust your gut and get out before it pulls you in. Because once you're lost, it's not just your body that's in danger, it's your entire reality. My name is Jackson Halloran, and I'm 34 years old. I'm a rational man, a science teacher, a skeptic at heart. But what I experienced in August 2023 defies every logical explanation I know. I suppose you can choose not to believe me. You can write this off as a fever dream from a traumatized mind. Part of me hopes you do, because if you think I'm telling the truth, if you think the devil in the shape of a child still roams the badlands, then you might lose some sleep. And if that child ever finds you, you'll lose far more than that. I still hear his voice in my quieter moments, a whisper in the wind. Time goes wrong. Time goes wrong. Maybe the next time I close my eyes, the clock will freeze again, and I'll open them to find myself back in that burning campsite. Perhaps I never actually left. Perhaps none of us do. We just keep wandering, finding illusions that pass as normal life, while that demon boy watches from the corners of our eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to remind us that once you step the wrong way, you never truly come back. My name is Thomas Delaney. I'm 33 years old, and this story takes place in October 2023 at Pembina Gorge State Recreation Area in northeastern North Dakota. I'm writing all of this down to try to get the nightmares out of my head, but I suspect the dreams will never stop. Whether you believe a word of it or not, I have to share what happened. I'm a freelance graphic designer, or at least I was until about a month before this trip. My major contract, an ad campaign for a small outdoor clothing brand, was canceled without warning. Suddenly, I was left scraping together odd jobs online, staying in my cramped Fargo apartment, and feeling the weight of it all press against my ribs. I needed air. I needed an escape. That's when an old friend of mine, Tyler Haskins, someone I hadn't seen in years, reached out. He'd been working as a nurse in Minneapolis and was also drained by the daily grind. He suggested we go on a camping trip together to recapture a bit of our old college days, back when we'd go on impromptu road trips with minimal gear or pitch a tent in someone's farmland. We decided on Pembina Gorge because it was remote, scenic, and boasted plenty of hiking trails. I'd been up that way just once before as a kid, and all I could remember were the gorgeous fall leaves and the rolling hills that seemed to expand forever. Tyler had never been, and the idea of an authentic wilderness experience appealed to both of us. We brought my German Shepherd, Rex, along. Rex is, or was, fiercely loyal and protective, the kind of dog that sleeps at the foot of your bed and wakes you up with a slobbery kiss in the morning. He loved the outdoors as much as I did. We planned for a 4-day trip. We'd drive up, leave the car in a safe lot near one of the official trailheads, and then hike deeper off the beaten paths to find real solitude. Phones, we reasoned, wouldn't be an issue. We'd keep them charged for emergencies, but we promised each other we would try not to rely on them. Tyler brought a topographic map, a compass, and a basic GPS device that he'd used during one of his more official guided camping trips out west. I had a standard paper map I'd downloaded from the park's official website. We both had decent gear: tents, cold weather sleeping bags, freeze-dried food, first aid kit, that kind of thing. I drove up from Fargo to Walhalla, the closest city with actual lodging, and met Tyler there. We had a quick lunch at a local diner before heading out to the park in my SUV. Rex sat quietly in the back seat, occasionally panting. The crisp autumn air was bracing, and the maple leaves and birches were aflame with reds and golds. It felt perfect, exactly the spiritual reset I was craving. We parked near the main entrance, grabbed our packs, and headed northeast along a marked trail. Tyler kept joking that we should at least keep track of how far off trail we went so we could find our way back. But around mid-afternoon we found a side path, something barely visible in the undergrowth, and decided to push deeper into the gorge. The aim was to set up camp near a small creek that meandered through the lower valley. After about 2 hours of walking, we found what seemed like a suitable spot. It was flat enough for tents and offered a decent clearing so we could keep an eye on the perimeter. I let Rex explore while Tyler and I set everything up. That's when I got my first strange chill, and not from the weather. Rex was sniffing around the edge of the clearing when he suddenly stopped and pointed his ears straight up. I paused, expecting to see a deer bounding away, or maybe some smaller wildlife. Instead, Rex let out a low rumble, something between a growl and a whine, and turned to look back at me. "He's probably just picking up on a rabbit or something," Tyler said. But he sounded unsure. Normally, Rex would bark at small critters or chase them off if he felt bold. But here he just stood, hackles raised, lips curled back slightly, as if something in the trees was far more threatening than usual. The leaves rustled. Then the wind changed direction. I swear I smelled something. Old, like rancid earth. A moment later, Rex retreated to my side. We shrugged it off. It's nature, after all. Animals scurrying about, maybe a coyote or a wolf. Nothing we couldn't handle if we were cautious. We ate dinner around a small fire that first evening. Tyler and I shared stories about the old days in college, about random pranks, about the road trip we took to Colorado once, sleeping in rest areas half the time. Rex eventually curled up at my feet. The first night was calm enough if you ignored how jumpy I felt every time the breeze rattled the branches. We heard the usual nighttime critters. Owls, maybe the distant call of some coyotes, leaves falling. Sometime around midnight, though, I thought I heard laughter. It was distant, possibly my half-asleep mind conjuring things, but for a second, I was sure it was a man's laugh. When I strained my ears, all I heard was the slow rustle of wind. I fell back asleep, telling myself we were far from any roads, and definitely far from other campsites. I woke up at dawn. Tyler was already up, rummaging through our shared food bag. I noticed that my phone's battery was all the way down to 22%. I'd turned it off before bed, but somehow it was on the entire night. I chalked it up to an accident on my end. That's me, sometimes absent-minded. But it still nagged at me because I specifically remembered switching it off and seeing the screen go dark. We decided to push deeper into the gorge, exploring old ravines and ridges. As we walked, Tyler insisted on using his GPS occasionally so we wouldn't get completely lost. The device, a small handheld model, seemed to be acting up, though. The coordinates flickered, and at times it'd place us in the middle of Canada, then back into North Dakota. Tyler smacked it a couple times, but the glitch persisted until it simply froze altogether. "Maybe the batteries are dying," Tyler said. But I could see they were fresh. He'd just replaced them the day before. Rex walked close by my side. He wasn't the typical excited dog sniffing every bush. It was as if he was on guard duty, occasionally glancing at me or Tyler to make sure we were still there. By mid-afternoon, we found a picturesque spot to make camp. There was a small slope leading down to a narrow creek, overshadowed by tall birches. The late October air had a bite to it, and we wanted to be close to water without being stuck in a swampy area. That night, we set up a new fire. Tyler and I tried telling ghost stories. It felt silly, but it was tradition. We talked about Bigfoot sightings. I never believed in Bigfoot, but I teased Tyler about his fascination with cryptids. We talked about old local legends from the small towns in North Dakota, like ghosts of old settlers or phantom lights that appear in the farmland. I was stirring the campfire with a stick when I noticed the flames looked wrong. First, it was normal orange and yellow, then it flickered green at the tips. I rubbed my eyes. Could have been some chemical on the wood, maybe sap, but the green hue lingered for a solid 30 seconds before snapping back to normal. Tyler saw it too. "Dude, that was weird," he said. "Never seen that last so long." I just shook my head and half laughed, trying to push the dread aside. We fell asleep soon after. I woke to a feeling of coldness on my face. My sleeping bag was unzipped, the flap open, letting the chilly night air brush against me. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, so I shrugged it off at first. But then it dawned on me. I had definitely zipped it up. Had I kicked it open in my sleep? I turned on my headlamp and froze. The zipper was wide open, all the way to the foot of the bag, unzipped from the inside. I was alone in my tent. Rex was outside, presumably near Tyler's tent. I had this overwhelming feeling that someone had been in here, had been leaning over me while I slept. My heart pounded so violently that I felt it in my temples. I got up, fumbled with my boots, and stepped outside. It was pre-dawn. The sky had that bluish tinge. I saw Tyler's tent a short distance away zipped up. Rex, normally curled beside me, wasn't in sight. I called out, "Rex?" No response. Then I called again, more insistently. I heard a faint whimper from behind a thicket. What I found sent a chill through me. Rex was standing near a gnarled old tree, sniffing at a piece of cloth snagged on the bark. It looked like a scrap of black canvas or nylon. I realized with horror that it looked a lot like the fabric of someone's tent. I checked Tyler's tent again. It was intact, but the side facing the woods was lightly scratched, as if by large claws or a knife. I decided I had to wake him. I unzipped his tent and peered inside. He was curled up, bag zipped, thank God. But that's when I saw his expression. Even in his sleep, Tyler's face was twisted into a grimace. He looked like he was in pain or terror. I gently shook his shoulder. "Hey man," I said, "wake up. Something's off." He stirred and blinked at me. The moment he was fully conscious, he gasped, looking around wildly like a cornered animal. Then he exhaled and forced a laugh. "Jesus, Tom, you scared me," he said. "What's up?" I hesitated. "I thought someone was messing with the tents." He yawned. "Probably the wind or something." And just like that, he seemed relaxed again, as if the problem was nothing. I pointed out the scratches, and he shrugged, saying maybe some raccoon tried to get in. Something in his tone sounded forced, like he was trying too hard to brush it off. We decided it was best to move on, maybe find another campsite a little deeper or closer to an established trail. We didn't talk about the weirdness in detail. We just started packing up. That's when we realized that one of Tyler's backpacks, the one carrying his spare clothes, was missing. We searched the area thoroughly. No luck. Eventually, I walked about 30 yards into the trees looking for it. My scalp prickled the closer I got to a small clearing. I saw a shape high in the branches, and at first I thought it was a large bird. On closer inspection, I realized it was Tyler's pack. It was torn open and hung there as though it had been tossed with tremendous force. The straps were tangled around a thick branch. His extra shirt and socks were strewn about the base of the trunk. I called Tyler over, and we spent an unsettling 10 minutes recovering what we could. The bag was slashed, as if by a sharp blade or claws. Neither of us had an explanation, not a reasonable one anyway. By the time we got back to our tents, the last of our freeze-dried packs of food smelled rancid. It was like they'd been left in a hot car for weeks. Tyler peeled open one pouch, gagged, and threw it aside. I tried to open another, but the smell was enough to make me want to vomit. We'd only spent 2 nights out here, yet all our supplies seemed to be rotting. We pressed on, mostly because we had little choice. We hadn't left ourselves a straightforward route back to the car. Relying on a glitchy GPS or inconsistent map reading was going to be a challenge. Tyler wanted to find a vantage point, maybe a ridge where we could get our bearings. But at around midday, the sky started turning gray, and a light drizzle fell. With it came a biting wind. We trekked through the wet brush, Rex at my heels, until we found a faint footpath that snaked uphill. As we ascended, the drizzle turned into a cold rain. We were soaked. By late afternoon, we were fairly miserable, but at least we spotted a natural overhang in the rock formation. Enough space to huddle under for a bit. Tyler offered to gather wood to start a small fire under that overhang. I agreed, letting him wander maybe 20 yards away, out of sight, while I set our gear under the driest patch of ground. Rex whined, looking in the direction Tyler had gone. Minutes passed, then 20, then 40. The rain slackened, but Tyler didn't come back. I called out for him, but no response. My gut churned. Something was very wrong. I told Rex to stay, but he ignored me and bounded off. I had no choice but to follow. We traced a muddy path dotted with footprints that eventually vanished among the thickening brush. After a bit of searching, I found him. Or at least, I saw his silhouette. Tyler was standing with his back to a gnarled birch tree. His clothes were torn, and his hair was matted with water. No sign of the wood he was supposed to gather. "Tyler!" I shouted, half in relief, half in anger. "Where the hell have you—" He slowly turned. His eyes had this glazed look, and I realized his lips were parted in the weirdest grin. He wasn't shaking from the cold, even though he was drenched. He just stared at me, and for a second I wasn't sure if he recognized me at all. I repeated his name, stepping closer. Finally, he blinked, once, twice, like he was trying to remember what was happening. "Sorry, man," he mumbled. "Got lost, took a nap." "Took a nap?" I echoed incredulously. "What do you mean a nap? It's raining out here." He just smiled too long. A drop of water fell from his brow, tracing down his cheek. Then he repeated the phrase, "Got lost, took a nap." I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. Tyler was never prone to messing with me in such a disquieting way. If he was playing a prank, this was an elaborate and disturbing one. Eventually, he followed me back to our makeshift shelter. The entire time he was silent, except for an occasional mutter of random words that made no sense. I tried to quiz him. "What's your job? How do we know each other?" He only offered half-lidded looks and mumbled something about college. Rex refused to go near him. The dog kept pacing behind me, letting out soft whines every time Tyler moved. That night, we managed to get a fire going, but only just. The flames sputtered in the damp air. Tyler sat cross-legged, staring into the embers. Occasionally, he'd smile that too-wide grin. My stomach was in knots. I was so uneasy I couldn't eat. By about 9 or 10 at night, Tyler's eyes began to focus again. He said he felt like he had a fever and was hallucinating. I tried to get him to rest, gave him one of the antibiotic pills from our first aid kit, and told him to hydrate. He seemed to come around a bit, enough to hold a coherent conversation at least. But in the middle of that conversation, he'd zone out and stare past me into the darkness. I wasn't sure if it was safe for me to sleep, but exhaustion eventually took hold. Rex stayed curled next to me, and I must have passed out. I woke to a series of raspy barks from Rex. I shot upright, heart pounding. The embers of the fire glowed faintly, and Tyler's sleeping bag was there, but empty. The zipper was undone again, just like mine had been. Tyler was nowhere in sight. Rex barked urgently, circling our sight. I fumbled for my flashlight, shining it around. I called out, but the only answer was the hollow echo. That was when I noticed the tracks. Tyler's footprints leading away into the dark. I found him after what felt like an hour of stumbling through twisted brush. Or rather, I heard him first, crying and muttering. He was standing behind a large boulder, arms hanging limp at his sides. The moment I shone my flashlight on him, he turned to face me. His left arm was smeared with blood from the elbow down, a faint trickle glimmering under the beam. My heart lurched. "Oh my God, you're hurt," I said, stepping closer. He raised his hand, palm streaked red, and touched my face lightly. I jerked back, stepping away from the gore. That's when he began speaking in a low monotone. "Wrong fur. Wrong fur. Wrong fur." I followed his gaze downward and saw a mass of brownish hair in the leaves. Fur, rather. My breath caught. It was some kind of animal. I angled the flashlight and froze in horror. It was the partial remains of a coyote, maybe, but the face was missing. There was just raw muscle where the muzzle should have been. I didn't want to imagine Tyler having done that, but everything pointed to him. We got back to our campsite, or what remained of it, just before dawn. The fire was out, the embers cold. My bag and Tyler's bag had been flung aside. Our water jugs lay overturned, water still dripping out into the dirt. I decided that we needed to restrain Tyler for his own sake. Whatever was happening to him, it was beyond reason. But I was just a freelance designer. I had no idea how to do it properly. In the end, I settled for leading him back to his tent, forcing him inside and zipping the front flap fully closed. I secured it from the outside with some paracord around the zippers. I could hear him muttering inside, occasionally rattling the nylon walls. Daylight crept in slowly, painting the gorge in a dull gold. Rex and I sat just outside, waiting. I tried to gather my thoughts, maybe formulate a plan. The car was easily miles away, and the terrain felt like it was changing under my feet with each step. That's how disoriented I was. I decided I'd try to navigate us back to the main trail, possibly leaving Tyler in the tent while I scouted ahead. I had to figure out which direction was truly safe. I grabbed the compass from my pack. The needle spun in lazy circles. For a moment it pointed north, then east, then south, refusing to settle. I tapped it, but it was as if the magnetic fields in the entire area were scrambled. Next, I tried the map. The topography lines made no sense compared to where we'd walked. Even referencing the creek or the slope of the hills was fruitless. We just couldn't pinpoint our location. That's when I realized the sun itself was off. Typically, you can approximate east from sunrise, west from sunset. But on this morning, the sun's position felt too far north. I tried not to panic, but fear coiled around my gut. Then I noticed something that made me reel. My watch was ticking backward. I'd purchased this watch specifically for the trip. Simple design, analog face, brand new battery. Yet the second hand was reversing in a steady motion. The small date window still read October 15th, which should have been correct, but for all I knew it was lying to me as well. I rationalized that the watch must have somehow been damaged. Water seepage or a blow I hadn't noticed. But it was another piece in a puzzle that made me feel like reality was unraveling. After some internal debate, I decided to open Tyler's tent. I wanted to see if maybe he'd returned to normal. It couldn't have been more than an hour or two since I zipped him in. I untied the paracord and unzipped the flap. The tent was ripped open from the inside. The back wall had two massive tears, one running from the floor to the ceiling. Tyler was gone. The sleeping bag lay neatly in a corner, but it looked inside out. There was no sign of him. Rex sniffed around, clearly anxious. That's when I heard a strange sound, like a whimper coming from behind a thick clump of brush. Cautiously, I moved closer and peered through. Tyler was curled up near a fallen log, trembling. I whispered his name. No response. I slowly approached. His eyes met mine, and for a split second I thought he was himself again. There was a flicker of recognition, maybe even shame. But then his gaze darted past me to Rex. Without warning, Tyler lunged, grabbing a small branch from the ground. Rex barked and jumped back. I tried to intervene, shouting, "Tyler, no!" But he swung the branch at Rex's head, landing a glancing blow. The dog yelped in pain. Fury and horror blazed inside me. I tackled Tyler, wrestling the branch from his hands, screaming at him to stop. He let out a strange guttural hiss that didn't sound human. We struggled in the dirt and wet leaves. I managed to pin him, but he squirmed in such an unnatural way, as if his joints bent at odd angles. Finally, I let him go out of sheer shock. He scurried backward, grabbed a handful of mud and flung it at me, then dashed off into the trees. Rex bared his teeth and moved to chase, but I called him back, not wanting him to get hurt again. I felt tears threatening to surface. This was my friend. The guy who used to laugh with me at stupid jokes and talk about the funny things his patients did at the hospital. Now, it was like he devolved into something primal, something monstrous. At midday, the world seemed unnaturally still. Clouds drifted overhead, but the rain never quite restarted. The wind held its breath, as if waiting for the next horror. I sat on a log trying to feed Rex some of the leftover food that wasn't rotting, mostly some granola bars I'd sealed in a jar. The dog was trembling, occasionally favoring one leg. I worried Tyler had fractured or sprained something in that attack, but Rex could still walk, so hopefully it wasn't too serious. I stared at my phone. The screen was dead. Even plugged into my small portable charger, it refused to turn on. It was the same with Tyler's phone. We had no means of contacting help. I wanted to believe we could find a ranger station or run into other hikers, but the place was deserted, and something told me this gloom that had settled around us would keep help away. Around mid-afternoon, I heard a rustling from the undergrowth. My entire body tensed. Then Tyler stepped into the clearing, nude from the waist up, shirt missing. He had scratches all over his torso, dried blood on his left leg. He walked with a slight limp. He spoke my name in a voice that sounded more like a hiss. "Tom." I stood up, uncertain whether to run or try to help. Rex let out a rumble of a growl, but he didn't charge. Tyler cocked his head to one side, eyes too wide. Then he said, "Sorry, about earlier, I'm not feeling well." My pulse pounded in my throat. "Tyler, sit down. Let me check you for injuries. Let's just figure this out." He took a step, then collapsed to his knees, panting. I rushed over and helped him up. His skin was ice cold. He flinched at my touch, but he allowed me to guide him back to our makeshift shelter under that overhang. I set him down gently and tried cleaning the blood from his leg with water from my canteen. He winced, but he didn't lash out. Carefully, I asked him if he remembered attacking Rex. He blinked, confused, then shook his head. "I've been so cold," he whispered. "It's like I can't get warm." I placed a spare shirt around him, the only clothing I had left that wasn't soaked or torn. It fit badly, but at least it offered some coverage. He stared at me with a hollow expression, as if part of his mind was gone. Yet something about his face made me uneasy. His gaze kept darting to a spot behind me, near the fire pit we'd tried to keep going. When I turned to look, there was nothing but damp ashes and scattered stones. But Tyler's lips kept curving into that eerie smile. Night fell, and I dreaded the darkness. Tyler seemed slightly more coherent. He even cracked a faint grin in a normal, recognizable way at one point when I recalled a college memory. But soon after, he'd drift back into that vacant stare, lips parted. We decided, or rather I decided, that we needed at least a small fire to stave off the cold, and maybe to keep predators away. The previous night, the flames had burned greenish at times, but I was too desperate to avoid them now. Tyler offered to help gather more wood, and I felt a knot of worry in my stomach. The last time he volunteered, he came back a changed man. But he insisted, trembling yet determined. I told him he had 10 minutes. If he didn't come back, I'd search. Rex watched him leave, ears flattened. After a moment, the dog ran after Tyler. Initially, I thought it was a good sign that maybe Rex sensed Tyler was back to normal. I waited, counting the seconds. 5 minutes, 7, 10. My arms quivered, half from the cold, half from fear. At 12 minutes, I stood to go after them, but that was when Tyler appeared at the edge of the clearing with a bundle of sticks. Rex was by his side, looking calm. "It's okay," Tyler said in a subdued tone. "Got the wood." Relief washed over me. We set the wood near the fire pit. I used my flint and some tinder from my emergency kit to get a small blaze going. The flames flickered yellow and orange, dancing across Tyler's features. For the first time in hours, he looked human. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. I nodded, trying to blink away tears of raw stress and exhaustion. We huddled around the fire, the shadows casting strange silhouettes on the rocky overhang behind us. I asked Tyler if he remembered any details about his disappearance, or that weird chanting. He shook his head. He only recalled finding himself deep in the woods, freezing. For a while, the situation almost felt normal. Just two old friends and a loyal dog by a crackling fire, the crisp autumn air around us. Then I noticed the flames start to flicker green again at the tips. I felt a spike of dread. I glanced at Tyler, and he seemed transfixed by the fire, eyes wide. Rex let out a low growl. In that moment, Tyler's hand darted to a broken branch beside him. His movement was so fast I almost didn't process it. He scooped it up and drove the jagged tip toward Rex. I screamed, "Tyler, no!" and lunged, but it was too late. He slashed across Rex's neck, a swift, brutal motion. Blood splattered across the damp ground. Rex let out a choked yelp, then collapsed. My world imploded. That dog had been with me through so much, and in a single horrific second, Tyler had ended his life. I roared with anger and grief, grabbing Tyler's wrist. We wrestled. My knees knocked him to the ground. The look on his face, it wasn't Tyler anymore. His eyes were black holes, no flicker of empathy or recognition. I wrenched the branch from his hand, tears streaming down my cheeks. Something primal in me took over, some savage corner of my mind that wanted revenge. I swung the branch at Tyler's face, connecting with a sickening crack. He went down, but he clawed at me, leaving deep scratches on my arms. Blood coated my fingers, mine, his, Rex's, all mixed. The crackling fire illuminated us in an awful tableau. Tyler hissed in pain, and that hiss turned into a series of unnatural clicks, like an animal might make. I raised the branch again, ready to strike, but paused at the final moment. Something rippled beneath Tyler's skin, a distortion that made my stomach churn. His features contorted, like someone was pulling on his cheeks from inside. He let out a low moan that crescendoed into a high-pitched wail. That sound forced me to clamp my hands over my ears. The branch clattered to the ground. Tyler jerked away, stumbling to his feet. He stared at me with fury, spittle dripping from a split lip. A guttural voice, layered on top of his own, spoke a single word: "Fur." Then he rushed me. I scrabbled backward, reaching blindly for any weapon. My hand found a half-burnt log from the fire. I swung it as hard as I could, catching him in the ribs. He doubled over, but before I could deliver a second blow, he sprang up with inhuman speed, slamming into me. I lost my grip on the log. We crashed against the rocky overhang. My spine flared with pain, and I gasped. Tyler raised his fists, preparing to bring them down on my face, but a sudden spark of recognition flickered in his eyes. He froze, mouth open, trembling. For a split second, his lips formed my name. Then he howled, a grotesque animal cry. I took advantage of that moment, grabbed a nearby stone, and drove it into his shoulder. He shrieked, staggering back. With no other option, I grabbed the flaming log again, mustering the last scraps of my strength. Tyler lunged at me, and I thrust the burning stick right at his face. The flames licked his cheek, and for a horrifying instant, the skin seemed to peel like melting wax, revealing a glistening mass of muscle. But it wasn't even fully human muscle. It looked twisted, misshapen. He reeled, stumbling away from the fire, screaming in an echoing, layered voice. In that moment, I glimpsed something that was not Tyler at all. Some terror with elongated limbs, no visible eyes, and a protrusion where the mouth should be. I don't even remember how I managed to get up. My knees were weak, my thoughts in a frenzy. But I recognized that moment as my only chance to escape. I took one last look at Rex, my best friend lying in a pool of blood, unmoving, before sprinting into the dark, tears blurring my vision. Time lost all meaning in the chaos that followed. I know I ran downhill, bursting through brush, stumbling over rocks and roots. Twigs snapped beneath my boots. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my chest burned. Each time I glanced at my watch to gauge how long I'd been running, the second hand kept spinning backward. It was as though time was unwinding itself in this cursed place. In my blind panic, I managed to reach some semblance of a trail, though it was likely a game trail used by deer. I followed it for what felt like hours. The moon hovered overhead, but it was in the wrong position, and sometimes it seemed to jerk a little higher in the sky, as if skipping forward. I half slid, half fell down an embankment into a shallow stream. The icy water jolted me, but it also snapped me out of my daze. I crawled to the bank and collapsed onto the damp grass. Everything ached. My arms, my chest, my head. That's when I heard it. Distant howling. It didn't sound like wolves or coyotes. It sounded like something imitating them. The pitch was too high, the notes too jumbled. I forced myself to keep moving. Eventually, I spotted what looked like a small ranger station or a cabin in the distance. Relief flared in me like a dying star. I made my way there, stumbling in the dim moonlight. The structure was old, with rotting wood. The windows were broken. The door off its hinges. This wasn't an active ranger station, but rather some abandoned outpost. The place exuded a sense of tragedy, as if something awful had happened there long ago. I stepped inside, hoping to find a radio or at least shelter. My flashlight flickered, but I managed to sweep it across the interior. Moldy papers littered the floor, and some battered metal cabinets stood in the corner. On the far wall, a series of old photos hung in frames, coated in dust. One of them showed a small group of hikers or rangers standing side by side. I scanned the faces. Grainy, black and white photography. At the far right, partially in shadow, stood someone who looked eerily like Tyler. The style of clothing screamed 1980s. Knee-high socks, short shorts. But the man's face was a mirror of my friend's. A chill slid down my spine. I checked the date scrawled in white ink on the lower corner. 1983. That was long before Tyler was even born. Yet the resemblance was uncanny, right down to the shape of his grin. The wind moaned through the open doorway. My flashlight died. I slammed it a few times, but it was gone. I wanted to rummage through the cabin for any clues, but the dread that built up inside me was overwhelming. I turned to leave and froze. Standing in the doorway was Tyler, or the thing wearing Tyler's face. Smoke curled from the burn on his cheek or its cheek. His eyes gleamed like an animal's caught in headlights. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body felt paralyzed by terror. Then, as if some leftover fight instinct kicked in, I lunged to the side, diving behind a splintered desk. The creature advanced slowly, its footsteps too heavy for Tyler's slender frame. It spoke in that layered voice, something about fur again, but the words bled into each other, like multiple voices speaking at once. I crouched behind the desk, heart hammering so violently I thought I'd pass out. Then I realized the desk had an open drawer with something metallic glinting inside. I reached in blindly, my fingers closing around a half-rusted flare gun. I yanked it out, not daring to hope it still worked. The creature moved closer, the floorboards creaking under its weight. I spun around, aimed, and pulled the trigger. A shower of sparks erupted, accompanied by a roaring hiss. The bright flare seared across the cabin's interior, illuminating the creature's hideous form for an instant. Its shape was all wrong. A mishmash of twisted limbs under the illusions of Tyler's flesh. It let out a shriek that made my eardrums feel like they were splitting. Half blinded by the glare, I seized the moment to run out the broken door. The beast howled behind me, flailing. I heard wood splintering as it rampaged in fury. I ran. I don't even recall how long I sprinted through those ghostly trees. My entire body screamed at me to stop, to rest, but I couldn't. Any time I slowed, I swore I heard it behind me, sniffing, rasping, calling my name in that horrifying tone. Finally, by sheer luck or maybe some cosmic cruelty, I emerged into a clearing that looked vaguely familiar. The horizon was turning from black to a pale gray. Dawn was coming again, or at least some semblance of it, and there, stumbling along a deer trail, was a man in a ranger uniform. My heart soared. I raced up to him, babbling about my friend, the skinwalker, how my dog was killed, how I was attacked. The ranger, an older guy with a bushy mustache, looked at me with a mix of alarm and confusion. Slow down, he said, glancing around. "Let me see your injuries, you're bleeding." I realized I had dried blood all over me and was limping. My arms were covered in lacerations. I tried to explain everything, but I must have sounded insane. The ranger radioed for backup on a handheld device. He said something about a possible assault victim, location unknown. The radio crackled back with static, but eventually another voice responded, saying they were on the way. I felt tears of relief well up. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. The ranger knelt beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. He told me we'd get an ambulance, that everything would be okay. But then, from behind him, I saw a figure step out of the trees. A man in a matching uniform, presumably the backup. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm expression. His name tag read Peters. He gave me a small smile, and for a fleeting moment I swore his eyes flashed black. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by normal brown irises. The older ranger introduced him as Ranger Peters, who had come to help. I stared at them, trembling, trying to speak, but I couldn't force words out. The older ranger said, "Let's get you to the station, son," and tried to guide me along. We started walking, the two of them escorting me, each with a hand under my arms for support. I kept looking at Peter's face, my breath hitching each time he smiled at me. There was something too long about it, too perfect. We reached a battered old truck parked a short distance away. Peters opened the passenger door and gestured for me to get inside. The seat looked real enough, but my instincts screamed in protest. I took a step back, eyes flicking between the two rangers. The older ranger frowned. "You can trust us. We'll get you help." I hesitated, then took another small step toward the truck. Peters never took his eyes off me. Slowly, I forced myself into the passenger seat, heart hammering so loudly that I could barely hear them. They closed the door, hopped in, and started the engine. The truck rumbled. Peters drove, while the older ranger radioed back to let them know they'd found me. Through the windshield, the dawn sky glowed an odd, pinkish hue. My watch ticked backward, counting down some invisible hour. I stared at Peters's reflection in the rearview mirror. He wore a polite, almost paternal expression, but every so often his lips twitched as if he was fighting the urge to grin. When we locked eyes in the mirror, I felt ice trickle into my veins. Everything became a blurred haze of exhaustion. The older ranger rummaged in the back seat for a blanket. He offered it to me, saying I looked half frozen. That was when I noticed the name on his badge. Haskins. My breath caught in my throat. Haskins, the same last name as Tyler. "Small world," he said, as if reading my mind. "Family from around here?" I tried to find my voice. "Your name, Tyler." He gave me a puzzled look. "Tyler? Don't know a Tyler. Why?" I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea hitting me. The truck jolted along a rough path, the engine groaning. Eventually, we came to a battered sign that read Pembina Gorge Access Road. It looked half rusted, covered in graffiti. Within a few minutes, we pulled up to another ranger station. This one was a bit larger, with a patchy radio tower off to the side. The older ranger helped me inside, let me sit on a worn bench. Peters lingered near the door, that odd smile tugging at his lips. The older ranger said, "Wait here. I'll find a first aid kit." I nodded, hugging myself. My eyes darted around the interior. It had an old desk, some filing cabinets, a corkboard with pinned notices about hunting regulations. A single overhead bulb buzzed, flickering occasionally. Peters watched me, arms folded. I tried not to meet his gaze. The older ranger, Haskins, returned, carrying bandages and a small bottle of antiseptic. He started cleaning the cuts on my arms, apologizing if it stung. I asked if we could call an ambulance or the police to search for my friend's body or for a missing person. Haskins frowned. "Sure we can, but are you sure he's gone?" "Yes," I choked out. "I'm sure." Peters let out a soft chuckle. "You'll be fine," he said. There was something hauntingly final in those words. Haskins prodded further, wanting details. He asked me about the creature, about the location. His tone was sympathetic, but sometimes I caught him glancing at Peters with a strange look. I did my best to provide a coherent story, but between the adrenaline crash and the heartbreak over losing Rex, I must have sounded insane. Haskins nodded politely. "I'll fill out the paperwork," he said, as if that was the only step needed. Then he handed me a steaming mug of coffee that he'd fetched from a side table. I stared into that murky liquid. My reflection shimmered in it, rippling. Then I spotted something behind me, the reflection of Peters. His lips parted in a silent laugh, teeth too white, eyes shining. I jerked my head up, heart pounding. He was still standing by the door, arms crossed, face neutral. Was it just my imagination? Haskins told me they'd take me to the hospital in Walhalla. I forced a grateful nod, not knowing what else to do. They led me outside to the truck again. My limbs felt heavy, as though weighed down by invisible chains. We got in. The sun had risen fully, but the color was off, like a pale, sickly yellow. Peters drove this time, while Haskins sat beside me in the back seat. I asked if they could turn on the radio, maybe call in to confirm the route. Haskins tapped the device, which crackled. Then a voice came through, faint but audible. "Pembina Base, you there? Over." Peters picked up the mic. "We're en route to Walhalla with an injured hiker. Over." Static, then. "We have no record of..." "You sure you have the right frequency?" Haskins glanced at me. "Yes, it's 152.87, over." Silence. Peter's hands tightened on the wheel. The road swayed, and outside the trees seemed to swirl. A flicker of triumph or something danced across Peters's face. That's when I realized I'd never actually seen any official ID from these men. No name tags, no official jackets beyond the uniform, nothing verifying they were real Rangers. Yet everything about them looked the part. Until you dug deeper, the fear in my chest coiled tighter. I thought of the older Ranger's name, Haskins. Could he be related to Tyler in some impossible way? Then there was the photograph from 1983 that looked exactly like Tyler. Were these illusions, or new shapes taken by the creature? The truck bumped along a path that I realized wasn't a paved road at all. It was just another narrow dirt track through the woods. I blurted, "Isn't Walhalla the other way?" Haskins gave me a tight smile. "This is a shortcut." My pulse pounded. I glanced at the speedometer. The needle was moving backward, just like my watch. The numbers reversed from 30 to 20 to 10. "Stop," I croaked, the hair on my arm standing on end. "Stop the truck." Neither man responded. My breath came in shallow bursts. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. Then I noticed the older Ranger's face begin to twitch, as though something beneath was shifting. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Peter's grin again, that too long grin. My scream caught in my throat. The truck kept rolling deeper into the swirling forest. All at once, the sky seemed to darken, the trees bending in on themselves. My watch's second hand spun so fast it was a blur. I squeezed my eyes shut. Everything felt like it was collapsing. The last thought that flickered through my mind was of Rex, my faithful dog, and a wave of guilt and sorrow flooded me. I don't know what happened immediately after that. When I came to, I was slumped on the side of a highway, a real paved highway. A single car was pulled over, hazards flashing. A couple, a man and woman, were peering down at me, concerned. "Hey, are you okay?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a croak. My throat was parched. The man helped me to my feet. They said they'd nearly run me over, finding me stumbling in the middle of the road. They got me in their car, gave me water, drove me to a small clinic near Walhalla. The staff asked me countless questions. Where was my gear? Where was Tyler? All I could do was sob and babble about a monster. Eventually, the local sheriff was called in. They organized a search party. I couldn't bring myself to go with them. I was too shaken, physically and mentally spent. Days later, the sheriff returned with some battered equipment, random scraps of clothing, a piece of a torn tent. No bodies were found. No sign of Tyler, no sign of a monstrous creature. They found a few patches of dried blood near a partially burned campsite. That was all. I stayed in Walhalla's tiny motel for a week, trying to piece myself together. I asked the authorities if they'd found any Rangers named Haskins or Peters. They said no. There were no Rangers by those names in the area. Eventually, I returned to Fargo, but the nightmares followed. I dream of Tyler's face, the grin that went on too long, and the layered voice chanting, "Wrong fur." I dream of Rex, whimpering and bleeding in the flames. Worst of all, I dream about the truck with those two impossible Rangers, driving me deeper and deeper into a forest that loops on itself like a serpent devouring its own tail. In these nightmares, I never escape. I wake up in a cold sweat, the watch on my nightstand always reading the correct time, except for some nights, when I swear I see the second hand ticking backward before I blink it away. Whether you believe me or not, that's the truth of it. Pembina Gorge still exists, a beautiful wilderness for hikers and explorers. But there's something else out there, something ancient and malevolent. It knows how to wear our skins, how to twist our minds, and how to toy with time until we're lost forever. If you go up there, if you pass through Walhalla and into the depths of that gorge, be mindful of the shapes you see in the trees, and don't trust your senses. Above all, never wander off alone, because once it finds you, it will take everything you love, everything you are, and leave you with nothing but dread, and no guarantee you'll ever see the real world again. 01. My name is Derek Miles. I'm 32 years old. This happened in October of 2024, and even though I've tried to bury those memories, I need to tell it. Maybe getting it down in words will stop the nightmares. I doubt it, but it's worth a shot. I was never much of an outdoorsman. My idea of roughing it was a cabin rental with a Wi-Fi connection. But life doesn't really care how prepared you are for change. First, I lost my job, a startup in Minneapolis that ran out of funding. Then my girlfriend moved out the same week, leaving me in a half-empty apartment, burning through what little savings I had. I found myself at rock bottom, drowning in self-pity and depression. One night, while scrolling aimlessly online, I got it into my head that I needed to get back to nature. Some blog post promised that living off the grid for a while could reset my entire outlook on life. It sounded laughable, but I was out of ideas. I sold a bunch of electronics I didn't need, made sure I still had a phone for emergencies, and bought a second-hand SUV with decent mileage. My plan was simple: spend 7 days in the remotest part of the Turtle Mountain State Forest in north-central North Dakota. Just me and my dog, Brutus. I knew it was risky. I'm not naive enough to think I could handle the wilderness expertly. But I felt desperate to prove to myself that I could survive something, anything. Brutus is a 5-year-old Rottweiler, broad-chested and stocky. He's always been sweet, though suspicious of new people. More importantly, I trusted him to warn me if there were bears or wolves. I guess part of me imagined that this trip would be a chance to bond with him. Maybe I'd come back with a better sense of myself. Instead, I came back with the sense that the world is a far more dangerous and unexplainable place than I ever realized. I arrived in Turtle Mountain on a bright, chilly day. Early October was in full bloom, leaves turning gold and orange, crisp air that hinted at the winter to come. I had a rickety pop-up tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold weather, and a trunk full of dried rations that I assumed would last me a week. My phone had a full charge, and I even packed a solar charger. I had a brand new topographic map of the area, courtesy of an outdoor supply store in Bismarck. Everything looked straightforward. There were officially designated trails in the state forest, but I didn't want the official trails. I wanted to be alone. The deeper I drove into Turtle Mountain, the fewer signs of civilization I saw. The roads turned from asphalt to gravel, then eventually to single-lane dirt paths that forced me to slow down to a crawl. The thick forest pressed in close on both sides, mostly evergreens, but scattered with stands of aspen and birch. In the near distance, the ground rolled into subtle hills, the landscape betraying hidden wetlands. The air smelled both fresh and subtly rotten, like decaying leaves and stagnant water. It was a strangely enchanting combination. It took most of the day to find a spot that looked remote enough. A narrow logging road ended in an overgrown clearing that might have been used for camping in the distant past. The tall pines here were bent, many of them curving at the trunk like they were grown under tension. I assumed that they'd just been battered by the wind or shaped by heavy snow. Their bark was thick and peeling, dangling in narrow strands. In the setting sun, those strips looked like pale ropes swaying from their limbs. I set up the tent, hammered in the stakes, then let Brutus explore. He sniffed around with quiet curiosity at first, but soon he started growling at a cluster of crooked pines about 50 yards away. No matter how much I called, he wouldn't approach them. I tried to coax him with a treat, but he just stared at those trees and rumbled low in his throat. Eventually, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he smelled a raccoon or a snake. I tied him back at the campsite and started a small fire. I had a camera with me, hoping to make a private vlog for a YouTube series I'd optimistically titled Miles to Go. It was mostly for my own sense of accomplishment, and maybe to show my friends that I wasn't completely incompetent in the wilderness. That first night, I recorded a short monologue about how the trip was going to change my life. How I may not have a job, but I'm still a man with determination. I sounded ridiculous, but hey, it gave me a chuckle at a time when I really needed one. The forest around me was eerily silent that night. No chirping bugs, no rustle of small animals. Even Brutus seemed unnerved, glancing at those crooked pines every so often. The darkness came on fast, and the moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. I found myself nodding off by the fire, so I forced myself up, gave Brutus some water, and tucked into my tent. Sleep came easily, too easily in fact. I had nightmares I couldn't fully remember, just images of twisted rope and a sharp smell of something burning. When I woke in the middle of the night, I heard the trees creaking like old doors. The wind had picked up. I convinced myself it was just nature, zipped the tent up tighter and drifted off again. Morning brought an immediate annoyance. My phone showed no service, and my battery had plummeted from full to almost zero. That was impossible. I tried to power cycle it, but it died before it even reached the home screen. My solar charger was out in the SUV, so I retrieved it and set the phone on the dash with the windows cracked. I assumed I must have left an app running. Frustrating, but not a deal breaker. I was out here to disconnect anyway, right? I cooked some oatmeal over my little gas burner, fed Brutus, and decided to spend the day exploring. I had a watch on, which read 7:15 a.m. The plan was to hike a big loop and come back to the campsite by noon. Even if I got lost, I had a brand new topographic map of the region. So I stuffed the map, some trail mix, and a few water bottles into my pack, leashed Brutus, and set out. The first hour was peaceful. I walked along gentle slopes, felt the morning chill give way to the warmth of the sun, and saw a few hawks circling overhead. Brutus sniffed everything, occasionally letting out a soft bark at scurrying shapes in the underbrush. I used a black marker to blaze discrete marks on tree trunks, just in case we got turned around. At one point, I stopped to take photos with my camera, capturing the vibrant foliage. That's when I noticed my watch read 11:48 a.m. Several hours had supposedly passed, yet the sun was still low, and the shadows looked more like mid-morning. I double-checked my watch. The second hand was ticking backward, slow and irregular. I tapped on the face, thinking the mechanism was failing. It was just a cheap digital analog piece anyway. Shaking my head, I took it off and stuffed it in my pocket. I decided to head back. I figured I'd retrace the black markings I'd put on the trees, but I only found half of them. The second or third one I looked for was gone entirely. I found random black marks lower on other trunks, ones I swore I didn't place. Maybe I'd been sloppy. Anxiety prickled at my neck. I reminded myself that I was a city guy, not a master woodsman. Getting turned around in the woods happens to everyone. So I pulled out my map, oriented myself with the sun, and aimed us home. 40 minutes later, I found my camp. But something was off right away. The fire pit was cold, as if it hadn't been used in days. My folding chair was folded up and leaning against a pine tree. I was sure I left it open by the tent. Next, I unzipped the tent, only to find my sleeping bag missing. My empty backpack with some random gear lay half unzipped on the floor. It made no sense. No animals could have so neatly rearranged my campsite. I checked the SUV, heart pounding at the possibility of thieves. The doors were locked. The tent stakes were still in the ground, so nobody had physically moved the entire tent. Confused and annoyed, I circled the clearing, calling out, "Hello? Anyone out here? This is my site." No answer. I looked back at Brutus. He was sniffing around, ears perked, tail rigid. A low, uneasy growl built in his throat. Then the wind picked up, making those pine bark strips flutter like ribbons. I felt watched. The hair on my arms rose. I grabbed a small hatchet from my gear. City guy or not, I wasn't about to stand there helpless. I gathered my nerves and decided to do a thorough search. But after 10 minutes, I discovered the strangest thing yet. The missing sleeping bag was carefully rolled, lying behind the SUV. It was completely unzipped, as if someone had climbed out of it from the inside. When I picked it up, it felt icy cold, despite the morning sun. That's when I heard something behind me. A rustling, a soft footstep. I whirled around, hatchet in hand, and saw nothing. Just the shifting pines. My nerves buzzed. I was sure someone was out there messing with me. "Hey!" I shouted. "If you're messing with me, stop!" Silence. Then, from deeper in the forest, I heard a hollow whistle, like wind passing through a narrow tunnel. Brutus started barking furiously, snarling at the trees. I leashed him to keep him close, fear rushing into my veins. Everything about this felt wrong. Still, I forced myself to adopt a rational approach. I rechecked the SUV, rummaged through the trunk. Nothing valuable seemed missing. My phone was still in the front, connected to the solar charger. Miraculously, it seemed to have a charge now, but still no signal. I tried powering it on. It lit up for a moment, then glitched out, the screen cycling through random brightness levels. I cursed under my breath. So be it, I thought. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I had a tent, I had some supplies, and I'd only planned to stay a week. Maybe a local crazy was messing around. Or maybe I was just spooking myself. I spent the rest of the day resecuring my campsite, searching for clues. Footprints, cigarette butts, anything. Nothing. Just my own footprints and some old tracks from deer. Something felt deeply unnatural about the entire place, but I tried to swallow that fear. I would stay alert. That's all I could do. Night came again. The wind died down, leaving an unnervingly still air. I built a stronger fire and made sure to position my sleeping bag so I could see the tent flap. I had my hatchet within arm's reach. Brutus lay next to me, occasionally lifting his head to growl at the dark. Around midnight, I was beginning to doze off when the fire's embers suddenly flared green for several seconds, then snuffed out with a wet hiss. I scrambled up, wide-eyed, my heart hammering. With shaking hands, I tried relighting it. My lighter sparked, but wouldn't catch the tinder. For reasons I couldn't explain, the tinder itself felt damp, even though it had been bone-dry moments before. Eventually, I gave up and sat there in pitch-black darkness, listening to my own frantic breaths. Brutus pressed against my side, whimpering. I must have fallen asleep somehow because I awoke to a ghastly chill on my neck. The tent door was wide open. Brutus was gone. Panicked, I crawled out into the clearing. Early dawn light filtered through the crooked pines, giving everything a sickly gray tint. I called out, "Brutus, Brutus," as loudly as I dared. No bark, no noise. My mind immediately flashed to the worst possibilities. Maybe he ran off after a coyote, or maybe that psycho who messed with my stuff had taken him. My stomach churned with worry. Desperate, I grabbed my coat and the hatchet, then set off into the forest, half expecting to find blood tracks in the leaves. After only 10 minutes of searching, I stumbled across a tree I recognized, a particularly thick pine with bark hanging in long strands. I'd passed it before, but this time there was something new. A twisted, rope-like noose hanging from the lowest branch. It looked like it had grown there, the bark seamlessly fusing into a loop. Something about it made my skin crawl, and at the base of the tree lay a set of fresh paw prints, Rottweiler prints. I crouched to examine them, but they ended abruptly. It was as if Brutus had simply vanished in mid-step. I spun around in a panic, scanning the forest for any sign of my dog. Then I heard a twig snap behind me. I whipped around, and there was Brutus, just standing there looking at me silently. No wagging tail, no panting, no sign of relief at finding me. He just stared. His eyes reflected the dim light in a cold, almost metallic way. My heart soared in relief, but something in the back of my mind whispered that something was off. "Brutus?" My voice shook. "Where'd you go, boy?" He didn't move, didn't whine or wag, didn't even blink for several seconds. Finally, he padded forward. I reached out a cautious hand and he nuzzled it once, then turned to walk back toward camp. I followed, uncertain, scanning him for injuries. There were none. I tried to look in his eyes, but he kept avoiding my gaze. By the time we returned to camp, I was trembling with confusion and a creeping sense of dread. That day, I was determined to break camp and leave early. Screw this challenge. Something was wrong with this place, but when I opened the SUV's door, my stomach sank. The key wouldn't turn in the ignition. The battery seemed dead. I popped the hood, and the battery cables were in place. Nothing obviously tampered with, but the engine wouldn't even try to crank. I pulled out the phone again. Still no service. The screen flickered with glitchy lines. I tried to calm myself. Maybe the battery had died unexpectedly. Maybe the phone was just worthless out here. Fine, I could walk out. I'd come in on a logging road that connected to a backcountry route some miles away. If I followed that route, eventually I'd hit a main road or find a ranger station. I stuffed essential gear into my pack: food, water, a flashlight, the map, the hatchet. I made a harness for Brutus, too, in case I needed to keep him close. Then I started down the narrow dirt track. I followed it for nearly 2 hours. At points, the way was boggy, and I had to skirt around stagnant pools. The forest thinned, revealing stumps from old logging cuts. I was sure I was going in the right direction. Yet, after pushing through a dense patch of brush, I ended up in my own campsite. The SUV sat there, silent. My mind reeled. I physically couldn't have made a circle unless that path looped in an impossible curve. I tried 2 more times, using the map carefully, marking my path with orange cloth scraps on branches. Each time I ended back at the clearing. My panic grew. I approached the trees I'd marked. The cloth scraps were gone. All that remained was a faint blackish smudge on the bark, as though the cloth had been burned. Even Brutus was whining, ears flattened to his head. I stumbled to the SUV, hands shaking. It was then I saw him, standing at the edge of the clearing. A man in a forest ranger uniform, looking about 40 years old. His hair was shaved close on the sides with a few days' stubble on his cheeks. Relief, confusion, and fear all crashed into me at once. "Hey!" I called out. "Over here, my car's dead. I'm stuck. Please." My voice came out too loud, almost hysterical. He slowly raised a hand in greeting, then made his way over. His uniform looked old. Faded patch, scuffed boots that seemed out of style by decades. Up close, I could read the name tag. Howell. He gave a friendly enough smile but didn't quite meet my eyes. "Mornin'," he said quietly. I told him everything that had happened, my phone dying, the strange illusions, the rearranged campsite, the impossibility of leaving. His expression remained neutral. When I finished, he just said, "Well, let's see if I can help." That was it. No questions, no alarm. He walked over to the SUV, opened the hood, and stared at the engine without touching anything. Minutes passed awkwardly. Brutus wouldn't go near him, instead circling far back by the tent, watching. I asked Howell if he had a radio or phone. He said, "No phone," and tapped a heavy old walkie-talkie on his belt. "Battery's out," he muttered. I asked how he got here, but he dodged the question, saying something like, "Been around these parts for a while." Confusion simmered in my head. He was a park ranger. Wasn't there a station or ranger tower nearby? "I've been patrolling near the Canadian border for a while now," he said, voice trailing off. His eyes drifted across the crooked pine trunks as though in a trance. "Been watching folks get themselves lost out here. You're not the first." I forced a laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. "Well, that's comforting. Can you guide me out?" He faced me with a slow turn of his head. "Sure, but first, might be wise to rest. The forest is tricky if you're tired." I glanced at the late afternoon sun. Still have a few hours of light left, at least. "If we hurry." He shook his head, stepping closer, face too calm. "It's later than you think." I looked at the sky again, noticing a strange haze that made it hard to pinpoint the sun's position. A prickle ran down my spine. "Look," I said, swallowing my fear. "I can't spend another night here. Something's wrong." Howell's eyes flicked towards Brutus, who had started barking. "Everything's wrong in these woods," he mumbled, as if reciting a line. "We never should have built roads up here. She doesn't like roads." "She?" I said, goosebumps rising. "Who's she?" He gave a cryptic smile. "You'll see her eventually." That's when I saw the name on a battered ID card pinned under his name tag. Shane Howell. My mind raced. I'd read about a missing park ranger named Shane Howell about 6 years ago, though my memory was hazy. The article said he vanished without a trace. Something twisted in my stomach. Could this really be him? Before I could ask more, he touched my shoulder, and it took everything in me not to recoil. "It's best we stay put tonight," he said. "I'll try that old station radio tomorrow." He was already walking away, leaving me with a sinking feeling that I'd just stepped into a trap. I turned to find Brutus at my side, trembling. For a moment I considered running into the woods, but I knew I'd end up right back here. Night fell. Howell set up a small second tent next to mine, one that looked like it had been left outside for years, its fabric bleached and torn in places. We sat around a fire I managed to light, the flames shifting greenish streaks at times. Howell stared into them, humming a tuneless melody. Brutus never once took his eyes off the man. I tried to ask questions, but Howell dodged them. "Been here longer than you might think," he said at one point. "She keeps us." 1,000 questions burned in my mind. Who was she? Why couldn't I leave? But I was afraid to push him too far. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I retreated to my tent. I didn't dare remove my clothes, though. Brutus lay at the foot of my sleeping bag, wide awake and growling softly every time Howell's silhouette moved outside. That night, I dreamed about the crooked pines. I was suspended from a thick branch by a rope made of the tree's own bark. Below me was a swamp of black mud. Something in the darkness whispered, "You'll feed her." I jerked awake, covered in sweat. Brutus was gone again. Terror seized me. I scrambled out of the tent, ignoring the cold. The other tent was empty, the flap unzipped. Howell was gone too. A flicker of movement caught my eye near the pines. I saw silhouettes. Two shapes. One was Brutus, pinned to the ground. The other was a man leaning over him, hatchet raised. With a guttural shout, I charged forward. The figure turned, revealing Howell's face twisted in shadow, eyes black in the darkness. He swung the hatchet at me. I ducked, a glancing blow scraping my shoulder. Pain flared. "Stop!" I roared. "Get away from my dog!" But Howell hissed in a strange, rasping voice and came at me again. I realized with cold horror that he was whispering the same phrase over and over. "He's ripe now. You'll feed her. You'll feed her." I thrust out my arm, blocking his next swing. Agony shot through my forearm as the hatchet cut flesh. Blood sprayed hot across my clothes. Howell was impossibly strong, half crazed. Brutus snapped at him from the ground, fangs scraping Howell's leg. Howell snarled, hammered the hatchet down again. I seized the handle mid-swing, adrenaline spiking, forcing it sideways. Then Brutus found his chance. He clamped onto Howell's calf. Howell let out a choking groan, stumbling. I tore the hatchet from his grip and swung it around blindly, connecting with something solid. Howell collapsed with a wet thud. The silence fell except for my ragged breaths. For a moment I stood there, panting, disoriented. Blood dripped down my arm. Then I looked down at Howell's body. He lay on his back, breath rattling. Shadows flickered across his face. His lips curled in a smile that looked too wide, as though his cheeks were torn. "She'll come for you," he croaked, before rolling onto his stomach and dragging himself, yes, dragging, toward the thickest stand of pine trees. His leg was obviously broken, bent at an unnatural angle, but he moved with an awful, crawling speed, ignoring the savage wound Brutus had given him. I took a step back in horror as he merged with the darkness. Gone. I dropped to my knees beside Brutus. He was trembling, but alive. Blood matted his muzzle, and I realized some of the blood on him was mine. My arm was still bleeding, so I tore a piece of my shirt to stanch it. We limped back to the fire's remains. My brain was in full panic mode, but I forced myself to focus on immediate survival. I needed to treat my injuries and figure out a way out of these damned woods. Ripping open my med kit, I doused the cuts in antiseptic, hands shaking. Brutus licked his front leg, where a shallow slash stained his fur. The question hammered in my head. What the hell was happening? Was Howell possessed, insane, undead? I fought back a wave of nausea and fear. The only thing that made sense was leaving. Now, wounded or not. Dawn came, though it felt abrupt and unnatural, like someone had flicked a switch. I bandaged my arm and stuffed essentials into my pack. The tent, the cooking gear, none of that mattered. I needed to escape. Brutus limped at my side, but he could still move. That was when I noticed an even more horrifying sight. Brutus had an open gash on his belly, but it looked partially healed. The edges were crusted over, not fresh, as if days had passed in a matter of hours. My own bandage had turned yellowish, like it had been on for a week. Confusion battered my senses. Time wasn't working right here. I glanced at my phone, still no service, and the date read 11/11, which was impossible. I'd only been out here a handful of days in October. My head swam. I found a battered trail sign about 200 yards from the camp, half buried in foliage. The paint was faded, but I made out Ranger Station. An arrow pointed west. Despite my swirling fear, I latched onto that word. Station. If Howell had one, maybe there was a working radio. I convinced myself that either Howell wasn't the only ranger, or that maybe I'd find an old transmitter. I led Brutus, forging west through dense brush and boggy ground, ignoring the setting of the sun if it happened, ignoring hunger pains. My only thought was that radio. I had to keep going or I'd die here. Eventually, I came upon a clearing. The remains of a small wooden structure rotted there, a building with a collapsed roof, half swallowed by vines. I recognized a tattered sign out front that read Turtle Mountain Station. My relief was short-lived, though, because the place looked abandoned for decades. Inside the ruins, I found a rusty bed frame, a desk covered in ancient papers, and an old radio set that was smashed to pieces. The entire roof had caved in on it. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight. It felt like stepping into a tomb. I rummaged through drawers, scanning old water-damaged logs. One entry mentioned a ranger, Shane Howell, in 2018. That was 6 years ago, but the logs abruptly stopped mid-sentence, referencing a string of vanishings. I also found a moldy framed photo of Shane Howell, clean-shaven, smiling next to a group of other rangers. A wave of pity and disgust rose in me. Something had happened to him. Maybe he'd starved, maybe he'd lost his mind. Or maybe something worse had twisted him into the thing I'd seen last night. Brutus pawed at the desk corner, whining. Under the desk, I found a trapdoor in the floor. I pried it open with the hatchet, the hinges squealing in protest. Darkness yawned below. Flicking on my flashlight, I peered into a cramped cellar. My heart pounded. There might be supplies or a functional radio, or something else. Wooden steps led down. Carefully, I descended, Brutus at my heels. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rotting wood. My flashlight revealed empty shelves, except for a single crate. I opened it to find a couple of old water canisters, some rotted food packets, and a tangle of old rope. Disappointed, I almost turned away, until I noticed a second crate behind the first. Forcing them apart, I pried open the second one. Inside were bricks of commercial-grade explosives, the kind used in demolition or blasting rock, with a battered label, dynamite. My mind raced. This was likely used by the rangers for clearing stumps or old logging roads. Next to the dynamite was a spool of wire and a detonation box. Could I use this? If that part of the forest was impossible to leave, if it was some cursed anomaly, maybe I could destroy whatever was causing it. That was insane, but not more insane than anything else I'd witnessed. I didn't relish the idea of messing with old dynamite. But if Howell was out there, a puppet for something that couldn't be killed by normal means, maybe fire or an explosion could buy me a way out. It was a desperate thought, but I clung to it. I took 3 sticks, the spool of wire and the detonation box. The rest I left behind, not wanting to test fate by hauling too much unstable explosive. Brutus and I emerged from the cellar, blinking in the light. I nearly jumped when I saw a figure standing in the clearing. My eyes locked on the shape, recognizing it instantly. Howell. He was leaning on a tree as though supporting an injury, his leg twisted unnaturally, face pale. His uniform was torn, revealing slick, blackened skin beneath. It looked burned or decayed, riddled with holes. His eyes were dull and empty, yet a grin stretched his lips. "I told you, she doesn't like roads," he rasped. My pulse roared in my ears. I glanced at the dynamite in my arms, then at the forest behind Howell, noticing a line of those crooked pines. The bark strips fluttered in a breeze I couldn't feel. Howell stepped forward, left leg trailing. "She likes you, though," he said in that awful rasp. "Said you'd feed her well." I raised the hatchet in one hand, the dynamite pressed to my chest with the other. "Stay back," I warned. "I'm not going to feed anyone." He let out a low, phlegm-filled laugh. doesn't matter what you want." His body convulsed, bones cracking audibly. When she calls, we answer, even if we don't want to. Suddenly, Brutus lunged, barking, but I held him by the harness. My mind whirled. The station's radio was useless. The only real plan left was the madness I'd conceived moments before. Destroy the hanging pines or whatever core of rot was out there. The forest itself felt alive. Maybe if I set it ablaze or blasted those cursed trees, the loop would break. It was a guess, but I was too terrified to think of anything else. I locked eyes with Howell. "Where are these special trees she's tethered to?" I demanded. His grin faded slightly, replaced with a subtle anger, as if he recognized my plan. "You think you can burn her out?" he spat. "You can't burn her. She's older than all of us. She's the forest itself." But his eyes flicked to the side involuntarily, confirming my guess that there was some central cluster of pines. Maybe the ones my dog had growled at on the first day. I decided to bet everything on that. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, I sprinted for the forest. Howell howled, hobbling after me in a lopsided gait. I felt the dynamite bump awkwardly under my arm, praying it wouldn't explode prematurely. Brutus barked and sprinted beside me. I never looked back. Branches whipped at my face, pines blurred past. The terrain became a swirling nightmare of bogs and fallen logs. Somehow I kept my footing, guided by a half-insane conviction that I was heading in the right direction. And there it was. The same clearing where I'd made my original camp, ringed by those bizarrely twisted, hanging pines. Some had broken bark that formed loops overhead, reminiscent of nooses. The ground here felt soft and spongy, and almost black loam from rotting leaves and stagnant water. A wave of nausea rolled through me as a sense of ancient malice pressed on my chest. I set the dynamite near 3 of the biggest pines, hurriedly attaching the spool wire to each stick, hands fumbling. I had no idea if the charges would still be good, or if I even had enough line. I managed to place them in some large hollows near the roots, hoping to blow them from below. If the trees fell, maybe the place would lose its power. My entire body trembled with fear and exhaustion. Brutus whimpered. I glanced behind me, seeing Howell emerge from the undergrowth. His face was a pale mask of hunger. He brandished a large branch like a club, dragging his twisted leg behind him. A low, guttural sound leaked from his throat. "You can't fight her," he said, voice static-filled and inhuman. She'll hang you like the rest." Ignoring him, I ran the spool wire back to a safe distance, hooking it into the detonation box. Howell lurched forward, swinging his makeshift club. I ducked, but not fast enough. The wood clipped my shoulder. Pain jarred me to the ground. The spool wire tangled around my legs. In that moment, I was sure I was done for. Howell loomed over me, eyes flickering with unnatural shadows. "Time doesn't work here," he snarled. "We never leave." I scrambled for the hatchet, but it had fallen out of reach. Brutus launched himself at Howell, jaws snapping at his face. Howell roared, hitting Brutus with the club, sending my dog rolling across the ground with a painful yelp. My vision blurred with panic and fury. I lunged forward, tackling Howell at the waist. We fell in a heap, his decayed flesh squelching under my grip. The stench of rot filled my nostrils. Summoning every last ounce of strength, I slammed my fist into his face, feeling bone crunch. He spasmed, trying to twist away. In that heartbeat, I wrenched free, diving toward the detonation box. I slammed the plunger down. The forest exploded behind me in a deafening roar. The ground bucked violently, throwing me and Howell forward. A colossal wave of dirt, smoke, and splinters shredded the air. For a few seconds, my hearing vanished in a high-pitched ring. Everything became a swirl of dust and the stench of burnt pine. My left ear bled from the pressure change. When my vision cleared, I saw a massive fire had erupted where the largest pines stood. Flames licked hungrily upward, greenish at the edges. Splintered trunks lay in shards. Smoke churned overhead, a thick black column, but it wasn't a normal fire. The wind whipped in strange patterns, swirling the smoke in a funnel. I felt the forest itself screaming, a deep, groaning rumble that vibrated in my chest. I spotted Howell crawling on the scorched ground. His right arm was gone below the elbow, severed by flying debris. His face was almost unrecognizable, jaw half gone. Yet still, he tried to crawl, aiming for me. I staggered to my feet, ignoring the pain in every part of my body. Brutus was limping but alive behind me. The flames roared, and I heard a shrieking sound, like wind through 1,000 throats. The swirling smoke parted, and for an instant, I saw an impossibly tall silhouette in the blaze, tendrils of bark-like limbs reaching out. Howell lifted his head toward it, a final broken grin twisting his mouth. Then the silhouette vanished into the column of smoke, and Howell collapsed in the dirt, unmoving. The flaming pines moaned, bark sizzling. My lungs burned from the smoke. Stumbling, I whistled for Brutus, and we fled into the trees, away from the inferno. We ran until I no longer heard the raging fire. My heart pounded in my ears and adrenaline surged painfully with every step. Eventually, we emerged onto a dirt road, one I'd never seen before. The sky was tinted orange with the glow of the distant blaze, but the sun was rising behind us, at odds with the color. Ahead lay a battered metal sign I recognized. Turtle Mountain State Forest, Ranger Service Road. My legs almost gave out in gratitude and shock. Without questioning how or why we'd stumbled onto it this time, I pressed on. The air grew clearer, the stench of rot subsiding. After a seemingly endless walk, I heard an engine. A pickup truck rumbled up the road, a local woman at the wheel. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, bloodied, covered in ash. She stepped out, instantly pulling out a phone to call 911. I grabbed her arm, babbling about the forest fire, about the horror we'd endured. She gaped at me, glancing at the faint black smoke rising above the treetops. We rushed into her truck, Brutus in the back seat, and sped away. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that swirling silhouette chase after us. But it was gone, at least physically. I wish I could say that was the end. But it wasn't. Though paramedics treated my wounds and I spent 2 nights in a hospital in Minot, the authorities found no sign of a major forest fire upon investigating the area. A few burnt patches of ground, sure, but nothing like the towering inferno I'd described. The roads I'd claimed to have traveled didn't match up, and no one found a body. No sign of Shane Howell, living or dead. Ranger records did confirm he went missing in 2018, but that was it. They chalked my account up to delirium, perhaps from an infected wound or dehydration. I was questioned repeatedly, but nothing came of it except suspicious looks. They recommended me for psychiatric evaluation, but there was no mandatory hold, so once I recovered enough to sign myself out, I left. Brutus survived, though he needed stitches in his hind leg. Physically, we both recovered. Mentally, I'm not so sure. Back home in Minneapolis, I was met with confusion and disbelief. My ex never came back. My friends offered sympathy, but quickly changed the subject if I brought up the forest. Everyone acted like it was all some bizarre accident, like I must be exaggerating or weaving a tall tale. But I know what I saw. Occasionally, I still sense that presence lurking just behind a stand of trees whenever I leave the city. Sometimes I catch Brutus staring at nothing, lips quivering in a silent growl. Other times, I'll dream of that swirl of smoke, that silhouette hidden in the flames. And I never wear a watch anymore. They always go haywire around me, ticking backward or stopping altogether. The worst part, though, is how I sometimes see a figure wearing a faded ranger uniform in my periphery, only to turn and find nothing. Or I'll be driving late at night and think I spot a sign for Turtle Mountain State Forest, where it can't possibly be. Even in broad daylight, I find myself gazing at the horizon, half expecting to see the hanging pines. Maybe she's out there still, calling, waiting for the next lost soul. Maybe I just brought a piece of that curse back with me. Either way, I doubt I'll ever return to those woods, because the real horror is the realization that the forest can call us whenever it likes, that time itself is just another branch for it to twist and knot as it pleases. We humans, we're just fuel for something ancient and hungry. That's my story. I wish I could say it has a neat ending, a moral or a final resolution. But I'm alive, and Brutus is alive, and that's all the closure I got. Every so often, I still dream about those ropes of bark swinging in the wind, and I wake up gasping, my neck tingling as though someone traced a line of cold steel across it. When that happens, I whisper to myself, "You escaped." Then I wonder if I really did.